Hello, and welcome to Horror Corridor, a podcast dedicated to giving you a well-rounded look at horror cinema with frequent forays into horror-related music and literature. I'm your host, Mr. Watson, podcasting from just outside of Olympia, Washington, and my primary goal is to provide you listeners with comprehensive horror reviews with hopes of drawing together those in the horror community to intelligently and respectfully discuss and debate each show's topics. Folks, it's episode 19, and I was just at Safeway, where a dude maybe 10 years my senior was corralling like 8 kids into a minivan, right? Well, I was driving my work rig, which also happens to be a minivan, and I don't know, folks, this guy saw me getting into my vehicle with my delicious bottle of whiskey, by the way, and he shot me a huge thumbs up ski before declaring, "Soccer dads represent." There were finger guns. I'm sure he told those poor kids a dad joke or 10, puns, things that aren't funny. Folks, this has thrown me off my game tonight because I'm apparently at a stage in life where these kinds of dads think I'm one of them. Ask Lil Watt. This is not the case. All right, if you're a new listener, bear with me through my pain here. We've got a great show ahead of us, and I'm stoked to bring it to your ears. So look, it's come to my attention that it's been quite a while since I conducted a spoiler-filled walkthrough of a film in that thorough Horror Corridor manner for which this podcast is known. In fact, it's been since episode 13 that I did such a thing. And guess freaking what, homies? It's been even longer since I broke out some legit, funky, fresh academic studies to go over as we flesh out the episode's themes. The last time I did that was episode 11, when I discussed the psychology of nostalgia. That was over a year ago, and man, that's too long. Plus, though, a little added bonus, that Frighteners episode was maybe my best review after Hereditary. Anyway, I thought it was high time I returned to the more in-depth approach to film critique. So on this episode, you'll be getting just that, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. We've got a solid agenda for the show despite my messing around, and that agenda consists of 4 things. Number 1. I want to give a quick spoiler-free review / recommendation for those of you who are looking for a solid 2019 horror flick that no one will pay attention to unless we talk it up all word-of-mouth style, homies, so ready yourselves for that. Number 2, we're going to get into a quick but nonetheless deep spoiler-free discussion of Velvet Buzzsaw 2019. It's March now as I record what you're hearing right this second, but I recorded that Velvet Buzzsaw review back in mid-February, over a month ago. Don't tell anybody. Let's just keep this a secret between us. Number 3, we've got a topic of discussion in which we'll be engaging here together, and that topic begs the question, can horror go too far? Got some articles we'll be going over, one of which relates to Velvet Buzzsaw, oddly enough, in a fairly peculiar way. I'll explain that when we get to that point, my friends. And then number 4, we'll review a film that is all too fitting for an episode such as this, and that film, everyone, is a Serbian film 2010. Now, I realize that there are certain members of this podcast's listenership that are not exactly thrilled right now to hear that I'm tackling this film and this theme, but before you stop the show, before you delete the episode, before you cast Mr. Watson out like a demon from a host, from a demoniac, please hear me out because we're going somewhere here, and whether this film is for you or not, I believe this discussion is for all horror fans. See, I understand that many in the horror community consider a Serbian film to be reprehensible and flat out refuse to watch it. In fact, a host of one of my favorite horror podcasts has even said that he will not talk about it on his show. He won't even utter its title, the name of the movie. And to that, I say right on. Nobody has to watch anything they don't feel comfortable watching. And I don't believe such a decision on its own merit makes a person prudish, narrow-minded, or puritanical by any means. There are things I don't want in my eyeballs, and for me, that itself is nothing more than a rule I've made for me that is free of any judgments of others or thoughts of artistic moral high ground and low ground. Screw all that stuff. That right there is just too slippery a slope, my friends, so I stay in my own lane, as it were. Now, on the opposite side of this same coin here, I know well-educated, well-adjusted folks who think a Serbian film is absolutely wonderful. There are even academic papers written about this film like mad, seriously, and so I would just like to throw this out there for everyone right here now, okay? I'd like to ask if you'll do me a personal favor, that even if you have no intention of watching this movie for the show, stay for the spoiler-free Velvet Buzzsaw review, and my recommendation, of course, and stay for the themed discussion, and know this, should you decide to listen to my walkthrough of a Serbian film whilst deciding not to watch the movie, keep in mind that you're in good hands. We keep it classy here on Horror Corridor. Horror, my friends, has the potential to be disgusting, vile, and transgressive, right? But when you're discussing such things. It's all in the presentation. It's all in the approach. And my approach for this review has nothing to do with glorifying the evil things that happen in this film, but rather to understand what the filmmakers are trying to say by electing to use such heinous acts as a way to drive home their themes. And that's just it, folks. I do think this film has something to say. Now, does that in itself justify the film's controversial content? Should it justify the controversial content? If not, we'll be asking this and more when we get to that point, but we gotta go in order here. So, allow me to cue up a little background music here to set the mood. Yeah, there we go. That is the type of sugar Papa likes. Okay, my friends, before anything, I wonder if it's safe to say that as I record here and now, late March 2019, horror is off to a slow start, is it not? I have only been out to the theater once this year, well, twice I guess. I took my son to see the Alex Honnold documentary Free Solo, and that was a truly amazing film experience. I probably won't see a better film this year, but as far as genre films go, it seems like the folks in my circle of friends and listeners are all expressing the same sentiment that 2019 is yet to throw its best at us. Help, my friends, I've only seen the following horror films this year so far. Here's just a short list. Lords of Chaos, The Hole in the Ground, Braid, The Golem, Piercing, Close Calls, Velvet Buzzsaw, which we'll be talking about in a bit. I saw Us last night. And then there's the film I'd like to recommend to all you folks right now, and that would be The LAPLACE'S Demon 2019. Synopsis time? Yes, I do. After a team of researchers develop a system to calculate seemingly random events, a mysterious professor invites them to his remote mansion on a rock in the middle of the ocean, where they find themselves being picked off one by a mysterious force that knows their every move. Everyone, there are 3 points I need to make clear before going any further. First, this is an Italian language film. Second, it's filmed in black and white. And third, there is no literal demon in the story. And that is not a spoiler either, my friends. Okay, alright, let's not get that twisted. The title of this film refers to a scientific idea put forth by an incredibly influential 18th and 19th century scientist named Pierre Simon Laplace. And it was in his 1814 piece on probability theory called Essai philosophique sur les probabilités, where his demon makes his grand debut. Laplace postulated that if a superintelligence, could know the positions, velocities, and forces on all of the particles in the universe at one freaking time, this being, this demon, if you will, would have perfect knowledge of the past, present, and future. It's something of a secular answer, I suppose, to the idea of an omniscient, all-knowing God. That said, what we've got here is a curious film that I can only describe as a 60s throwback gothic horror mystery tale, okay? Imagine an extended episode of The Twilight Zone with a 10 Little Indians narrative at its core, and that's what you got here. Film setup? Don't mind if I do. So, we've got this group of scientists who have managed to put together a formula that can predict the future to some small degree. The experiment they ran allowed them to calculate the number of pieces a shattered glass would make upon impact with the floor. Well, because of this fairly monumental breakthrough, they receive an invite from an enigmatic professor who lives out in the middle of an ocean. Which ocean? I don't know, just an ocean. And he lives on a giant rock. So they take a ship out to this place, and upon arriving they find no one's even there. They're a bit puzzled by this, but soon find that they are the unwilling subjects of an experiment going on inside the mansion that is claiming their lives one by one. So, I mean, that'll do it for me regarding film setup. So let's talk likes and dislikes here. Folks, my first like has everything to do with the aesthetics of this movie. Like I said already, it's an Italian black and white film with a 60s throwback style. But even though it has that Twilight Zone look and feel, the story still takes place in the present day. What's more is that because of certain filmmaking decisions, the lighting, this old mansion setting, the dialogue, and the way the film employs its special effects, you often forget that you're watching a 2019 movie. This isn't a slick and glossy feature. If it weren't for the scenes that feature modern technology, you could legit trick somebody into thinking that someone found this movie in a vault after 50 years of it not having seen the light of day. They cleaned it up a bit with a good transfer and released it. Several times, I found myself momentarily thinking that I couldn't believe I'd missed this movie all these years. So effective is the old Hollywood gothic tone. My next like is how this movie works to build tension. Early on, before the bad things start happening, our characters come across a complex model or mini replica of the mansion in which they're trapped, as well as chess pieces that represent each one of them. Once the physical threat of the film makes itself known, it's nothing short of amazing how the story utilizes this moving diorama of their setting to maximize dread. I realize I'm being vague here, but that's for the best since this is a spoiler-free review nonetheless. I found it honestly brilliant in its execution. I think viewers will equally appreciate, though, how this film introduces us to our professor character via an old VHS tape and how that's utilized. It lent to the film a Saw 2004-like vibe that I greatly appreciated. This next like I've got for all y'all gangsters has more to do with something going on behind the scenes. First, the film's got 4 writers. 3 of these being the main actors in the film and the other one being the director. But that's not all, folks. It seems as though these gentlemen did pretty much everything on set. Producing, editing, music, cinematography, arts direction, set design, sound editing, visual effects, and even more. Whatever they're doing, I want more of it, my friends. The last like I'll highlight here has to do with just how smart this script is. The story uses the "and then there were none" story structure where people are being picked off one by one in order to facilitate the film's free will versus predestination debate. Of course, very often when you're dealing with predestination as a theme, there's a tendency horror writers have to pair that with the supernatural in order to drive home the idea of fate as an otherworldly construct. The deal here, though, my friends, is that this brand of determinism is all scientific in nature, but is still no less frightening. A distinction that possibly ought to be made here for some people when it comes to how science sees determinism. You gotta look at ontological determinism versus epistemic determinism. Now, ontological determinism is just cause and effect, alright? That's what that is. Epistemic determinism, which is where our boy Laplace was coming from, is the belief that because the universe is naturally deterministic, that is to say that because it's governed by predestination, we should be able to somehow tap into that and be able to unravel the past and the future. I'm certain the filmmakers are well versed in all this nonsense, so it makes for a cool twist on the well-worn concept of a superintelligence or demon with higher knowledge being able to map out our destinies. I mean, hell, homies, this is a belief that many ancient Greek philosophers talked about back in the day, and even the Roman homie Cicero was going on about that business in 4 BC or whenever. Anyway, I think viewers will be able to tell from the dialogue and from the way our characters go about handling the mystery they're in that these writers worked hard to deliver an intelligent and thoughtful story here that's full of twists, turns, and unexpected story beats. As for them dislikes, I can't say that there was anything glaring. If anything, it'd just be stupid nitpicks. For example, the thing that's picking off our protagonists each by each is large and makes a tremendous amount of noise with every move it makes, yet there are too many instances of this thing sneaking up on everyone. Not something I'd say would take away from the film in my eyes, didn't lower my score, but I could see some people taking issue with that. Possibly the biggest thing some folks might have with the story is in one certain logistical problem that has to do with the Laplace demon theory as a whole. One of the biggest criticisms of Laplace's belief has to do with just how impossible it is to be able to make the computations necessary to get an equation that could map out the past, present, and future, especially since the universe doesn't exist in a closed-off vacuum where entropy isn't a thing, right? And so you run into the same problem that plagues many a lofty script, and it's a sin of omission that makes itself known the second you ask, exactly how did Dr. Frankenstein create life? Exactly how did the dead rise in Romero's Night of the Living Dead 68? Exactly how did Michael Myers get up at the end of Halloween 78? Exactly how did the professor come up with this equation in the Laplace's Demon 2019? Some people can easily suspend disbelief, and for the most part, I'm easygoing like that, but a great many are not, and may get unnecessarily wrapped up in the idea that we're just supposed to accept that this impossible equation is a thing. I would caution those of you who tend toward that mindset to let it go, and just enjoy the ride, because the way the story unfolds, there isn't any problematic emphasis on the mystery behind how the equation was discovered. Rather, the focus lies in what will happen to these characters as a result of this equation's implementation. Alright, final thoughts and ratings time. This is a total gem, my friends, a cinematic oddity for sure. After all, it's not every day you get 60s throwback flicks that are crafted with such smarts by talented indie filmmakers like this. This is a trend I want more of. I'm fine, alright, with them campy 80s throwback slasher type movies. I'm fine with gritty 70s throwback exploitation type flicks. I'm not tired of these yet by any stretch. Make 'em, but if you filmmakers out there so desire, give us some intelligent 60s throwback stuff, gothic style. I'm in. I won't say no to that. One thing I feel I should mention that made me quite happy was that as I watched, I found myself looking at this group of protagonists, most notably the ones that the script seemed to elevate as though suggesting that this is our final girl, this is our final guy. No matter what happens to anyone else, this person or that person, they're safe, right? I found myself locked in an internal debate to the tune of, well, if this film is about fate, is it positively or negatively ironic that I can predict which one of these people will die and who this script will spare? Well, let's just say that in this story, no one is safe. It's a legit free-for-all. Yeah, good stuff. Get on this, folks. It's all out there. It's all hanging out there on those streaming services. I rented it on YouTube for $2.99, and damn, am I glad I did. I'm giving this an 8.5 out of 10, and that score will only go up from there. Homies, I'll be surprised if this isn't in my top 15 of the year. That's what I'm talking about, and look, I'll tell you this much. I would love it. Just going to make a little personal request here via the podcast if I could get my friends from the Dark Discussions podcast to fully discuss this movie. And I know I already hit up Eric and he's like, oh, we've got the episodes planned out, but nah. Throw this in there. You won't regret it. I feel like they would be the best, better than I, who could show everyone what this film is all about. My friends, that is the LAPLACE'S Demon 2019. Alright everyone, let's get into my spoiler-free review of Velvet Buzzsaw 2019. If you're a new listener to the show, these spoiler-free reviews have a particular structure, an easy one, if you will, and I will. First, I'll shoot out a quick synopsis that I'll never take from IMDb because they're dreadful. Then I'll give some context by way of a little bit of film setup, followed by likes and dislikes, and finally, I'll wrap it up with my final thoughts and rating. Sound good? Let's go. A feared critic, an icy gallery owner, and an ambitious assistant snap up a recently deceased artist's stash of paintings with dire consequences. Yeah, I got that synopsis off the Netflix, and I like it because it's vague, but let's clear up these things and unpack the film a little bit, shall we? So, we viewers are following a small cast of characters through the ins and outs of the Los Angeles contemporary art scene. We've got the character of Morth Vanderwalt, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who's an infamous art critic with the power to make or break anyone with a single review. Okay, we got him. Rene Russo plays a gallery owner and art dealer who's at the top of her game, and we follow her assistant Josefina as well. We got Toni Collette up in this piece. She's playing an up-and-coming art dealer who's starting to make waves on her own. In the mix here, we've got yet another art guy who goes by the hilarious name John Don. Also representing the people who are lowest on the food chain, we follow Natalia Dyer from Stranger Things as a newbie secretary and even an office handyman of sorts. To top it off, the film highlights some famous in-demand artists, one of whom is played remarkably well by John Malkovich. So we've got this diverse cast of players here, who all work in or around art in some way, shape, or form, right? From the people who get the coffee and answer the phones, all the way up to the people making millions buying and selling these artistic works of varying sorts. Now, as we watch these characters go about their usual struggles, pains, and even their personal victories, something rather inexplicable happens. Rene Russo's assistant Josefina finds a dead old man in her apartment complex, and upon hearing that he'd ordered all his possessions to be destroyed, she goes to save the man's cat, only to find that his apartment is stacked floor to ceiling with this man's original artwork, and it's dark stuff, folks, disturbing stuff. But the deal is that it's fresh, it's new, it's amazing, and it could be worth millions upon millions, and so begins the race to get this anonymous artist's work out into the public sphere. The problem is, this old man was very troubled. His past is filled with darkness, and it's that very darkness with a capital D that he poured into his work that he'd wanted destroyed for good reason, because as the movie plays out, we come to find that anyone who was responsible for his painting seeing the light of day is now in mortal danger from a seemingly unstoppable force. I don't know, I think that should do it for film setup. Let's talk about my likes. From a technical standpoint, this film is as good as any A-list flick out there. It's got big stars, got stellar acting, the aesthetics and visuals are spot on, including lighting and effects. As a viewer, you needn't worry that you're getting into something schlocky should you decide to give this a watch on the old Netflix and do a little chillin'. After all, this is from writer-director Dan Gilroy, who did 2014's Nightcrawler, which was a stellar film. Where Velvet Buzzsaw shines, though, And my biggest like of the bunch here is what it has to say about art with a capital A. Here we've got these movers and shakers in the art scene who, upon finding this new artist's work, are sent into a downward spiral. And it all boils down to the effect these paintings have on those who view it. It's got the famous artists like John Malkovich's character, as well as another artist the film highlights who just aren't sure what to do with themselves and their craft in the face of this pure art. Gyllenhaal's character Morph, ever the godlike critic, is being driven over the edge who begins to risk everything to find out who this painter really was. And not to mention the people directly profiting off this man's work are quite literally dying gruesome deaths left and right. And these kills are fairly creatively handled, a definite like from Mr. Watson. That's me. I'm Mr. Watson. But keeping to the point, to the film's main themes here, we get a clear picture of what it means to exchange art for money, followed by the subsequent pantomime or charades of artistic integrity that comes with these gallery openings and shows. We see what it means in this vapid art scene to get rich from other people's work. Hell, we even see the struggles the artists themselves have while trying to navigate the concept of staying true to themselves in the face of fame and visibility. So put simply, this film wants the viewers to ask, what is art? And there's no easy answer to that. You could find libraries of books dedicated to understanding what art is and under what conditions art keeps its integrity or becomes compromised. You can get a doctorate studying these things and still not be too much closer than anyone else to understanding what a painting on the wall of a random coffee shop means, you know? Art is mysterious that way in its purest form because of its inherent subjectivity. So, in some respects, a piece's meaning can be just as dependent on the person consuming the art as it is dependent on the person who created it. So we're kind of getting into the death of the author philosophy here, aren't we? If you don't know that term, it's the school of thought that seeks to divorce the artist from their work in favor of the interpretation of the consumer. Basically, I can tell John Carpenter that Halloween 78 is all about how Michael Myers and his murders represent the patriarchy cutting down second-wave feminism in the 70s, and he can't say a damn thing about it because I got bullet points that prove my interpretation's just as important as whatever he might say about his own movie. Now, it's an extreme example, it's a joke, but that's the basis of what we're talking about here. It's the most absolute basic way to explain death of the author. And this philosophy can be legit. After all, aren't our interpretations of a work of art important when they're carefully thought out and sensible, right? I mean, isn't it great to dive into the art, be it a movie, a book, a song, or a picture, to see how it affects us all differently? Shouldn't great art strive to cause people to react in some personal way? Yeah? Now, I'm down with death of the author as a consumer because I'm sure I have interpretations about films and books and music that were the creator of that work to be in the room with me. They'd be like, dude, I wasn't talking about any of that stuff at all. You're off. And so, but to what degree is it right of me as a consumer to tell the artist that I have a better insight on their work than they do? Hell, I just read most of a dissertation the other day about why Tolkien's The Two Towers is a World War II allegory, despite the fact that he always denied that back in the day. And that's where, as a creator, I'm a little resistant to death of the author as a philosophy. If I wrote a story or a song and someone told me it meant something that it didn't, I'd disagree. I'd be in their face about it, but I mean, here's the key. I'd respect the idea that there are certain archetypal themes in most, if not all, art that we can all connect to in some way. And maybe that's the best middle ground there is on this topic. So what is Velvet Buzzsaw trying to tell us by having this mysterious artist who had poured his hostility and resentment into his paintings, so much so that they're imbued with a supernatural killing force? Like, what is that trying to say? Are we to take that to mean that you can't separate art from artist? Maybe there's something to that. Or maybe that's less the point than the fact that we're meant to look at how this man created his own art. And the answer to that is he did so privately. He did it for no one. He created this huge catalog of work all for himself. What does that mean? To create for no one but you? This is why I'm reviewing this movie on this very episode. You see, what you all don't know is that I've been planning this episode since I started this show in 2016, just kind of thinking it over. How to tackle a Serbian film. Well, about 4 years ago or so, I read an article in the Harvard Crimson about horror aesthetics, and it opens talking about the Spanish artist Francisco José de Goya. I read it while drinking a lot of whiskey, and I would set my whiskey glass on a coaster I'd had made of my favorite of Goya's works, Saturno devorando a su hijo, or Saturn devouring his son. Okay? It's a grotesque, haunting painting that I've always loved. But what I didn't know until reading this article is that it was one of 14 paintings now called the Black Paintings. And these were works that Goya had created on his walls in the privacy of his own home, works that he'd never intended for anyone to see. And after he died, these murals were cut from his walls and put onto canvas and sold. Now, I'll be relating this to a Serbian film, which was always my intention after starting my show, but here comes Velvet Buzzsaw out of nowhere, giving me the exact premise of this article I'd been wanting to cite in passing while talking about something else entirely. I can bet you anything that Dan Gilroy was inspired by Goya when he made Velvet Buzzsaw. And I think the timing is just crazy here. I announced on Facebook that I'm doing my Serbian film episode, and this Harvard Crimson article was always going to be my talking point, and then Velvet Buzzsaw comes out after. How serendipitous. Wrapping up here, at its core, this movie is about what it means to exploit art. What this unknown artist did in the sanctity of his apartment, what Goya did alone in his villa, what the goth teen girl does when she writes poems in her diary, what the punk rock kid strums on his guitar in his bedroom when no one's around. There's an outpouring there, a spiritual rendering from the person to canvas that has potential to be the purest form of art. Is that to say that a desire for consumers compromises art? I wouldn't say that by any stretch, but this film's message seems to have something to do with artists getting back to the basics, possibly to gain perspective on their craft once they've gotten too big for their own good. There's a scene in the film where a character happily draws circles in the sand at the beach by himself, lost in this task, even as waves of water come and destroy these circles he's making immediately. He doesn't care. It's just about the circles, the act of creation in its most undistilled form. There's a magic to that. Like when Buddhist monks create their mandalas in sand, they do so with precision and immense expertise, laboring to make these powerful and complex pieces of art only to pray over them once they're finished and destroy them right away. Nothing is permanent. All things change. Beauty is ephemeral, and that's okay. All right, let's talk dislikes. I believe many horror fans will have two main complaints with Velvet Buzzsaw here. The first of these that's liable to come up is that, look, no one in this film is likable, except for maybe John Malkovich, but he's not in the movie much. Other than that, though, we're stuck with an ensemble cast of characters who are all selfish, who disregard the well-being of others without a second thought. Everyone just wants to get ahead, and they don't care what it takes to do so. And with the exception of a couple side characters who have really nothing to do with the central mystery at hand in the film, there are no worthwhile redemption arcs, or none that are seen to completion anyway. You get a couple characters who see the light, but possibly they don't see enough of the light to save them in time. You get one opportunistic character in particular who does survive by leaving town, but the single reason she does this in the first place isn't because she's becoming a better person or sees what she's about to become, but rather she just ran out of the finances necessary to stay in Los Angeles. Basically, salvation by default. I can see all this being grating to some viewers because despite the amazing performances we're getting right and left, it's hard to root for anyone. In fact, it sometimes feels impossible to root for anyone here. But I think it would do viewers well to know that this is the intention of the film, to make us feel this way about the characters. Folks, this is satire. This is an exploration of the underbelly of the Los Angeles art scene via a caricature of that very scene. So I would encourage you to go on the journey on which this film wants to take you and enjoy yourself some dispositional alignment theory, that is, the joy you get from seeing characters in films die who deserve it, right? We got heavy air quotes on that. There's plenty of comeuppance to be had. For the second of these two complaints I feel viewers might have, make no mistake, this is a horror film, but horror is secondary here to the drama at hand. This movie takes its time allowing us to get to know the inner workings of this world and the people in it, and it covers a remarkable amount of ground in the process. I feel like people should not overlook that, but it still stands that if you're unprepared for this, you might be wondering where the horror is. It's there, but it's sparse. Alright, before I get into my final thoughts and rating, I thought we might hear from a friend of the show. My friend, Bonnie Bazell, wrote to me after we had a brief conversation about this film, and she did so not just because we're good old homies, but also because she's a longtime supporter of Ol Horror Corridor, and I keep saying ol, what's with that? And because she used to work, this is key, she used to work at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. You might say that she knows the inner workings of this world that this film is satirizing. Bonnie is also a fantastic artist, and if you go way back in the show's history, like episode 5 or 6, way back, I talked about receiving an art piece from her that she gifted me called Blondes and Blood. Look, my favorite director is Hitchcock. My favorite ladies is them blondes. And this is no offense to Kate, who, I've been going to trivia night with, and I know you got the reddish hair going on, and I like it. I'm not judging. You're not great at trivia night. I also know you won't hear this, but if you do, just research the facts better. I mean, why are you losing every time? I'm on your side. We should be... Okay, anyway. Listen, hold on. Favorite director, Hitchcock. Favorite girls, blondes. Sorry, Kate. Okay, those are the bullet points. But look, Bonnie's piece that she sent me encapsulates both of these things, Blondes and Blood, by highlighting the blonde female leads in many of Hitch's films, as well as touching upon the underlying psychological themes in these very films. It's a brilliant piece of work, and it's framed and hanging right next to my podcast station here and now. I also have a shower curtain print of a piece she did on Psycho's Marion Crane, and believe me, I love the irony of having a Marion Crane shower curtain. Come on. You know what? I think I'll post pics for all y'all in the Facebook group page so you can see her work, which I shall plug officially after I read what she sent me. Anyway, Bonnie is a wonderful human being, and I knew she and I were top tier G's. We was top tier homies when she referred to one of my ex-girlfriends as a C word. I hope that was okay to share, Bonnie, because I know you're listening and I just wanted to relate your marvelously accurate words here and now. So, all right. I don't know if that's going to make the edit. Who knows? We're going to find out. I guess if you're hearing this, then you found out. This is what Bonnie wrote me, though. Hey, Dustin. Yeah, she called me Dustin. Bold, but I like it. So, per our brief exchange about the whole museum environment of Velvet Buzzsaw, here's a little quick blip about my specific experience and take on the film. On a personal level, I found that the horror elements in Velvet Buzzsaw were campy and benign. After seeing both Hereditary and the Suspiria remake, I felt that both of those films take the marriage of horror and art to another level, while Velvet Buzzsaw is just wry satire with a sprinkling of horror on top. Also, Sam Malkovich, Colette and Russo, the acting is also all over the place at some points for me, as well as the pacing and editing. Anyway, enough of that. Quick background. I worked in the box office at LACMA, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, which is otherwise known as LAMA in the film. Oh, how about that? And she worked there for a couple years. She says, while I was there, I witnessed a lot, and lot is in all caps. I witnessed a lot of the things they poke fun at in Velvet Buzzsaw, which inadvertently made this movie register as comedy for me. I never got scared at any point, and instead found myself laughing at the top of my lungs. I can think of quite a few curators, administrators, and museum directors that they're poking fun at, that's for sure. I also noticed a lot of obvious and some backhanded references and nods to James Turrell, Yayoi Kusama, Jeff Koons, Francis Bacon, Damien Hirst, Anish Kapoor, Richard Serra, and Marina Abramovich. On another note, I feel like Dario Argento might have used Marina as inspiration for Suspiria's head witch as well. Oh man, Dave Z, what do you think of that? It's both hilarious, but it's also not the last Serbian name I'll be pronouncing on this here episode right here. Reading on. Also, quick story. The scene where Morph has a mental breakdown in the soundproof chamber actually reminded me of a real-life terrible moment. We had a solo person installation that was sound and light related sensory experience. And one morning, a person had a full-blown seizure inside of it. It was terrifying. The person was lying on a suspended bed in the middle of an open dome, and she fell off and hit the floor about a 15-foot drop. Yikes. Damn. The attendant came running to our office and screaming because he couldn't get the damn door open to get to her. She survived, thank God, and was actually fine. But yeah, that part in Velvet Buzzsaw made me a little annoyed because Morph just waltzed into the installation without signing any consent forms. Every gallery and museum always makes you sign stuff like that for any interactive installation. Rhetorical, I know. Also, that silver sphere in Velvet Buzzsaw reminded me so much of the Phantasm Killer Ball. Hilarious. Anyway, hope that helps. Thanks, Dustin. My Instagram is bbazellart. Folks, that's BBOZELLART, bbazellart. And I'm working on a project that is horror-related. I will announce it soon via the gram. I'm also excited to hear your next episode, dude. My friends, as a personal favor to me, I'd like to ask that you follow Bonnie on Instagram, and if you're into dark artwork, horror art, get at her because she's truly a next level creator. And I'm not just saying that because like, oh, she's listening and like, dude, I just would not say anything. Bonnie rules. If you're a horror fan, you need something from her hanging on your wall frame it, showcase it, hashtag me, we'll high five, you'll be the belle of the ball, get that psycho shower curtain and bathe in a classy fashion like your boy Mr. Watson do. If you're a member of the Facebook group page, I'll post links there to her work, and I'll probably find myself throwing down some pics of the work of hers that I have because you need it. Anyway, thank you, Bonnie. You clearly know more about who's who than I do. You're dropping names, citing real artists. All I do is use fancy words to say that I dislike or like something. You on the other hand, are proposing some some content entirely germane to our elemental motifs here. You fucking rock. Getting into my final thoughts and ratings, folks, I'd recommend this to artists and content creators of various kinds, as I feel it has a lot to say about creativity. I'd also recommend this to anyone, artist or no, who wants a taste of the high-stakes world of art acquisition with a dose of evil thrown in the mix. One thing that surprised me was just how thoroughly I was drawn into the story. In fact, and I don't know if this is a good or bad thing in the context of this podcast called Horror Corridor, but I often forgot that I was even watching a horror film. I found myself laughing out loud a lot, at the absurdity of certain things the characters were doing and saying. And I think I should clarify here that the film wants you to laugh at these things. It wants you to see the nature of artistry and profiteering. It wants you to see the falsehoods that go from the top on down. And then, of course, there's the horror. This is a bizarre film for sure, and people who want something a little different might just find themselves in for a good time Netflixing and chilling. Folks, I'm at an 8 out of 10 here, and that is my review of Velvet Buzzsaw 2019. And now, Horror Corridor Episode 19's topic of discussion: can horror go too far? In this discussion, my friends, my goal isn't to draw lines in the sand that pit the hardcore horror fan against the poser horror fan. Nor am I trying to assert that certain sensibilities are more enlightened or morally correct or barbaric or lowbrow. My aim, as always, is this. I believe that art imitates life and that life can be dark. So when artists create films worth considering, then we viewers are given a safe place to examine the horrors of the human condition and of the world at large. Folks, we're working to understand the dark, to understand ourselves. Shameless YouTube promotion for a page that doesn't exist yet, but just wait, I'm going to say that all the time on the videos. Having said that, let me ask one more time. Can horror go too far? Can it cross the line? If so, what is the nature of that line? Who put that line there? Why did they put that line there? Well, for starters, that line as we know it, here in the West anyway, isn't in any permanent fixed position. That's to say that this boundary moves and changes with the times because it's put where it is on the account of widely held social mores. In other words, it's where the prevailing social conscience of the current moral paradigm says it is. What does that mean in 2019? Does it mean the same thing it did back in the early 1980s, the days of the video nasties? Does it mean the same thing it did before the Hays Code was enacted in the 1930s? How about afterward? How about 10 years from now? I think it's accurate to say that modern horror fans laugh at the idea that Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974 caused the stir it did back in the day. Upon its initial release, it was banned in the UK, Brazil, Australia, West Germany, Chile, Iceland, Ireland, Norway, Singapore, and Sweden, and probably other places. But why? The movie doesn't even have any blood or nudity in it, right? How about The Evil Dead 1980? One of the very first video nasties. I took my son to see the hilarious stage play based on this movie, and we had a blast. What about Salo, or The 120 Days of Sodom? As of 2015, this film was still banned in over 50 countries. I mean, look, I'll be honest. This one made me nearly vomit, but is that right there grounds for a bookshop owner in Ohio, America, to get arrested for carrying the film in 1994 when the film wasn't even banned in the US? I mean, we can talk about films like Possession, The Exorcist, A Clockwork Orange, Faces of Death, I Spit on Your Grave, Last House on the Left, Cannibal Holocaust, all controversial back in their day and widely accepted now, maybe not Cannibal Holocaust. But hey, perhaps the idea is that we've come a long way since those days, and now we have a better understanding of what morality really is here in the 21st century. Yet, on the heels of France's cinema du corps, or cinema of the body movement, The 2000s gave us the new French extremity batch of films. And I hate that term, by the way, as much as I do torture porn, because they're both meant as pejoratives that caught on and defined the movement, like how that one guy tried to get post-hortus stick or elevated horse. Screw that shit. But the deal here is that we got these films that were looking at some earlier French trends, as well as what was going on in America at the time, and they were pushing the boundaries even further. But did these films cross the line? Did they trespass against our moral, collective boundaries? Some would say so, some wouldn't. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that wherever that line is we shouldn't cross, wherever that bad boy is right now, that line, as I record this here in March of 2019, it'll be somewhere else before long. Today in America, we've got the rise of PC culture, which at its heart is interested in protecting marginalized groups of various kinds, and I'm down with that. But then, when PC culture steps into outrage culture, basically when you talk to 90% of the people I know from Olympia, Washington, especially the evergreeners, we've got this pendulum swing into extremist thought that polices everything that everyone does. And that's dangerous when you sit in a privileged position and start firing your guns at everything that moves. Hell, we had this on the Horror Corridor group page recently where a lady listener accused another lady listener. This happened. The thread is still up. A lady listener accused another lady listener of being sexist because she didn't like the 2016 Ghostbusters reboot. The accusation, which was completely unfounded and wrong. Yeah, I'm taking sides. I don't care. Leave the group, whatever. The group is going to be defunct anyway. Just get out. But the accusation was that the young woman who didn't enjoy Ghostbusters 2016 only thought the way she did because of implicit internalized sexism against her own gender. You want to make a straw woman argument to boil someone else's opinion down to the lowest and falsest common denominator? Well, there you go. Like, my show is not for you, and I'm not going to hate on you, but you gotta go. But we're talking about how the PC culture we're in now here in the West defines that line filmmakers ought not cross. And I think this is a good thing. I think this PC culture can help filmmakers toe the line in a possibly socially conscious way that accomplishes a lot of things at once without giving into the extremist side of false progressive demands and without going backwards to a non-PC ignorance, you know? I don't know, homies. I'm excited to see the new ways the lines can be blurred or outright crossed. The question still remains, though, what is too far today? And that's hard to say because despite the rise of a militant PC culture, we've also got the rise of a culture that's against censorship and is all about freedom of speech. And guess what? The two cultures aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. It's very nuanced and across the board in a lot of complex ways. The deal, though, is that when you believe in freedom of speech, the implication is that such a thing also allows for hate speech. Not that hate speech is good. The idea is that the marketplace of ideas, the court of public opinion, will weed that stuff out and expose it for what it is, right? And so, these days, you're less likely to see a film so easily banned here in the West unless the filmmaker commits some crime that causes him or her to fall out of the public's good graces. Even so, I think that might lead more toward ostracization, right? Rather than an outright ban. Does that sound correct? But that's another topic in itself because I'm guessing it wouldn't be very hard to get my hands on all three Jeepers Creepers films if I felt the urge to do so, right? No matter what the director did, you know? But what I'm building up toward is the fact that I became pretty confused when I was drafting out my notes for this part of the episode, back a while ago. Geez, I don't even gonna say how long ago it was, but, can horror go too far? I turned this question to the Facebook group page, and I was pleased at the responses I'd gotten. The general consensus seemed to be that it's personal. I've talked with folks who believe that if an animal dies in a movie, and I'm not even talking real death a la Hannibal Holocaust, a la Cannibal Holocaust rather, but their belief is that the killing of an animal is going too far. Some are this way with the harm that comes to children. This is going too far. When I was about 19, I showed one of my old buddies from youth group Friday the 13th Part 2, and not only did it absolutely frighten him to death, but he simply could not wrap his mind around why anyone would want to watch people die on screen at all. What is the use of something like that, he asked me. And I think that's a fair question. I think that's a great question. On the Facebook group page, a great deal of you wonderful friends and listeners drew the line at sexual assault or pedophilia. But even then, not a single one of you fine folks said films with such content shouldn't be made. And that's a careful distinction that bears mentioning if you ask me. Some folks said that as long as the film is purely fiction, that if the filmmakers aren't breaking any laws, and that if those involved consent to what's going on, then anything goes. And folks, not to alarm anybody, but this is where I land personally on the subject, with one caveat. I require the films that tout themselves as disturbing or controversial to have a story, to have a point. Actually, I guess since I consider myself to be a story guy, I demand this of pretty much every film I watch, so whether it's disturbing or not. That said, I'm not against horror strictly as performance art, like say the American Guinea Pig films, Faces of Death, Human Centipede trilogy. I actually really like the Human Centipede movies because I get it. The idea is to showcase gore effects or to deliberately shock anyone who might watch it. I get that. But those are the types of films I usually just don't have time for. And I'm not saying they're morally bankrupt or some dumb stuff like that, or that people who love those types of films are barbaric. I'm just saying that there are only so many hours in the day and I just ain't got time for that business. You know what I'm saying? See, I need a story or an underlying theme to provide context to a film that realistically portrays intense violence or sexual assault or what have you. And one thing is curious about the answers I received from you fine folks on the Facebooks. We're all horror fans, so blood and violence comes with the territory. Sex does too, since it's inextricably linked to the violence. But it was forced sex that bothered the most people. That crosses the most personal boundaries. I've known a lot of people personally and online who spout this rhetoric that Americans are desensitized to violence in films, yet balk at the notion of sex. These same folks I've talked to have this idea that European sensibilities have, got it a little more correct in that department because they're more comfortable with sex than violence in their media. Look, after I released episode 5 of Horror Corridor on Frailty 2001 and The Miz 2007, the first time you all heard my son Lil Watt, when he was just 12 years old by the way, someone wrote into the show to say how much she enjoyed our banter. She then suggested Lil Watt and I watch a film together. Now, I can't remember the name of the film because I don't have her message in front of me, or that part of her message in front of me right now, but I replied to this young lady that I wasn't comfortable showing it to my son just yet because of the graphic sexual content of the film, and she was shocked that I'd be so close-minded. Here's a little piece of her response that I do have in my notes right now, and she writes, "How can you take any issue with my suggestion when you in turn show your son such violent films as these that you discussed on your podcast? It amazes me that Americans are still such Puritans in 2016. We talked it out a bit via email, and I could just tell as we wrote back and forth she was just not tracking with me whatsoever. But I was able to school her on the nuances of why showing my son certain types of violence isn't crossing any parental lines for me, whilst explaining why sex does cross those lines. First off, I know my son. I know him better than any human being on the planet. I know what he can handle and what he can't. The violence I'm willing to show him, even to this day, not even when he was 12, won't be something in the vein of Martyrs. Not yet, anyway. The violence we watch together is stylized and over the top. It's fun. It's cartoony. Hell, speaking of cartoons, when the coyote is chasing the Roadrunner and he gets smashed by an anvil, we're not seeing the real-world effects of what a 1,000-pound hunk of cast steel would do to a flesh and blood little canine creature. I think that's a given. For whatever reason, you can tweak reality so that acts of violence translate well into a kid-friendly medium. On paper, that sounds ridiculous, right? But the second you see the coyote blow himself up with explosions in his ongoing attempt to solidify his place on the food chain, you're laughing your ass off. It's the furthest thing ever from the explosions of a suicide bombing that victimizes innocent men, women, and children. It's the coyote. It's a cartoon. The power of the violence is neutralized. It's funny. But sex, that's a different problem. I can show you 1,000 different examples of fun G-rated knife or gun gags in cartoons. I'll wait while you try to show me one single instance of a fun G-rated cartoony sexual gag, no pun intended. And I'm not talking about Pepe Le Pew kissing on that skunky looking ass cat, or Bugs Bunny dressing up as the chick. Like, I'm not talking about innuendos here that utilize subtlety. I'm talking balls to the wall, legit sex acts here. G-rated legit sex acts here. Pun intended. Yeah, balls to the wall sex. Yeah, okay. Show me a laugh riot of a scene where Mickey Mouse outright honks Minnie's breasts and makes it it makes like a funny horn sound. Show me Daffy Duck hilariously whipping out the old dong and jokingly ejaculating all over the place. Oh, suddenly is that not funny? Is someone getting uncomfortable? Or what about show me Olive Oil grabbing Bluto by his erect ding ding dong and throwing him into the sea? Hilarious, right? Totally G-rated. Violence and sex can be equated. Odd how putting your finger in a shotgun as it goes off can be funny in a cartoon, yet I haven't seen one funny G-rated scene involving putting a finger in something else. You get what I'm saying, right? Are we tracking? And if you must know, that former listener had no idea how to respond to any of this Watson 1 mean girl listener 0. But it boils down to how sex and violence are handled in movies, doesn't it? If you're an actor and you get decapitated in a death scene, it's special effects. No real violence is being committed to give viewers the fake violence. But if you're an actor and you're French kissing an actress in a graphic sex scene, sure, the intercourse itself might be simulated, but you're still French kissing that chick. Tongues are touching. We still got real sex acts being committed to give viewers the fake sex, so to speak. Case in point, I've dated 2 actresses before. One of them did a kissing scene in a movie without telling me because she felt like it was cheating to do that. And she didn't think I'd find out for some reason. It's kind of strange. Don't bother asking me what movie it is. I won't tell you no matter who you are, but lots of you have seen it because it became a kind of big indie genre film of sorts. The actress I dated after that, though, oh my God. She was in this indie film with an incredibly, graphic sex scene where she and the actor were really naked, putting mouths and hands on places. It was some NC-17 stuff, my friends, or just a boring work day, as she told me. Nothing that comes up in this as I go about my work day, that's for sure. Perks of the trade, I guess. But she later dies in the film, and I can tell you this, she wasn't stabbed with a real knife, and it wasn't real blood pouring out of her chest. The difference, my friends, in how simulated violence and simulated sex works, it's all right there. One hits closer to home, doesn't it? Closer to the real. I wasn't at all uncomfortable seeing her death scene at the screening for her film, but I can't say the same about sitting there next to her while some actor dude is quite literally licking her up and down. Literally. Again, am I not making myself clear? Like, licking? Yeah. Okay. Again, between sex and violence in films, one has potential to hit so much closer to the real, I think. Getting back to what's too far in horror, I can see why the Facebook group page at large held the opinion that sexual violence crosses the line, whereas regular violence doesn't. I can show you a million hilarious death scenes that we'll cheer at which we'll cheer, I'm not exactly sure how many legitimately hilarious scenes of sexual abuse I can find for you. Well, especially if the victim's a woman. If it's a man, that's hilarious, right? No? Another topic for another day maybe, but folks, these things are points worth considering when we're gauging things in terms of what is more disturbing than another thing and why. Okay, homies, we are nearing the end of this topic of discussion here, but I wanted to bring attention to the article I mentioned in my Velvet Buzzsaw review. I have a link to it in the show notes of this episode because it's a stellar read. I read it about 4 years back and it's called Dead Letter, The Aesthetics of Horror, an investigative essay into the value of artistic representations of gore. Short title, short and sweet to the point. Good job. The article opens by talking about Goya's most famous of his black paintings. Remember when we talked about that earlier? Yeah, Saturn devouring his son, which was discovered on a wall inside Goya's villa after his death. The question the article raises has everything to do with why Goya would create this disturbing piece for no one but himself. And the deal is that over the years, art scholars have sought to put a rhyme and reason to Goya's approach to these black paintings. The Spanish government was in shambles at the time and constantly changing after the Napoleonic Wars, and it's thought that Goya developed a certain contempt for his fellow man. Here we've got this guy who had this mistress, possibly a daughter he couldn't even outright claim, and then he moves up to this private estate to escape public attention. He survives 2 life-threatening illnesses, all while his country is in constant political upheaval. Maybe he was just a hermit who was a masterful painter, right? Maybe that's all it was. And made this piece as a depiction of the state eating its people alive, right? Maybe, maybe not. There's no solid agreement amongst those who study Goya as to what his painting, as to what the Saturn devouring his son painting is saying. But the possibility exists that he did it just to do it. Art for art's sake. Horror for horror's sake. What does that mean, though? Well, there's a dilemma we face in our thinking when we look at art in this way, and the article presents it as follows. On one hand, were this a perfect world, arts critics could evaluate art on its own terms, meaning that the emotional response it evokes is the goal. Who cares what it means, right? Art doesn't need to be spelled out in order to be effective. Is the work doing its job by making the consumer feel something? Well, on the flip side, accepting this way of thinking, hook, line, and sinker causes the consumer to confront some things that aren't exactly pleasant. If Goya did indeed make Saturn devouring his son for no reason other than pure aesthetics, it forces the viewer to defend the idea of cannibalism and baby killing as art. Now check this out. The author goes on to mention a Serbian film. Hey, here we go, saying that if you rate this film according to the dread it intends for you to feel, then it's done its job masterfully. But by rating it as such, you're forced to defend a lot of reprehensible acts as art. The final paragraph of this article reads as follows. So we return to the monster and the baby, and the implicit challenge they put to us. That Goya is a great artist is virtually uncontested, but if in this instance he's showing us nothing but graphic cannibalism, can we accept this piece as great art? If we do, we are in the uncomfortable position of defending the vivid representation of distasteful acts as art, which puts us a mere step away from defending pornography as art. If we do not, we must reevaluate a critical trend of several centuries and face the daunting prospect of privileging certain emotions or certain forms of expression. Some middle ground must be negotiated, a happy medium that allows us both to appreciate the artistry of Goya's painting and without appending the name art to a Serbian film. So folks, I'm ever intrigued by the dark side of this already dark genre, and I've long been curious about effective arts and film criticism. I like the question this article is asking. Where do we draw the line when we look at art? What should we defend when looking at a controversial piece? Do we defend the acts represented, or do we privilege one way art makes us feel over another way? I agree that we need to reach a middle ground, but I would argue that we don't need to separate Goya and a Serbian film as this article suggests. You could feel free to do so if indeed both these works really are horror for horror's sake, but what we'll never know with Goya, we do know with a Serbian film. The filmmakers do have a rhyme and reason for this film, however messed up it is, and that validates the film in my opinion. Now, let me ask, where do you stand in relation to this article? Folks, I get that not all films need to have a moral or a point to be good. But like I said a while ago, when we step into controversial territory, I tend to prefer the ones that use the controversy to say something. I'm not taking a stand against those that just want to be messed up for the sake of being messed up. Like I said, if no one's breaking the law, if it's fiction, and if everyone on set's cool with what's being presented, I might not like it, or I might, but I won't fight it. You feel me? And if you folks want to see something that's messed up largely, but maybe not completely for the sake of being messed up, even to the point where the writer, director, and the main actress deliberately made certain that the sex acts and the acts of violence in the film were unsimulated, completely real, watch The Bunny Game 2011. Heavy stuff. Alright, I'm not just talking willy-nilly here. This topic is taking us toward the film I've chosen to highlight here on this episode, and it's a film full of crazy violence, much of that sexual in nature. And as I said before, a lot of die-hard horror fans outright refuse to watch a Serbian film. And I think that's okay. That doesn't mean we can't still take a look at what it's trying to say. Now, I know that for some of you who won't give this film a chance, it's tempting to say, I don't care what this film's message is, but I would caution against that type of thinking, even if you have no intention nor a desire to see a Serbian film. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, people thought the same thing about Evil Dead, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho, and so many others. I'm not saying with certainty that a Serbian film will become a universally loved classic in the next few years, but let's not forget that people once watched The Exorcist 1973 and could not take their minds off the fact that a child masturbates with a crucifix, says the phrase, "Let Jesus fuck you," and I'm not censoring that, by the way. That's the one F word I'm not censoring. I want you to hear it. And then she pulls her own mother's face into her nether regions. There we go, I used a euphemism there. Years later, though, the public at large has reevaluated its mindset on that film to see past the controversy and straight to the underlying themes. That's what I'd like us to do right here now with the Serbian film, so let's go through it together to see what lies underneath the controversy. I'll say this before we get into our walkthrough of the film, and it goes back to the Harvard Crimson article. A seasoned arts critic might take issue with the fact that we're looking for meaning in this film to justify it as art, because art doesn't require meaning to elicit a reaction. All right, another seasoned arts critic might take issue with the fact that by looking for meaning in this film, we're tacitly approving of the things that take place in the story. I think that both of these hypothetical opposing arts critics are missing something, though. The first one, who would say that art doesn't require meaning to be art, is forgetting that we live in a day and age where filmmakers are often very open about what their work has to say. This age of writers and directors' commentaries, this age of multitudinous news outlets, this age of YouTube and social media. Not all artists do this, of course. Some of them keep secret, leave it to the consumer, which is great. But it's not difficult to find artists who are happy to tell their audience what went into the process of crafting their work. So my question to this arts critic would be, Is my visceral reaction to the art any less credible if I can readily find context to the thing I'm consuming? Does context compromise art? And to the other arts critic, I'd point out that the search for meaning in a controversial piece of art is in no way condoning what is being presented. That is a false equivalency. I hate it. Also, if we're in the realm of fiction, then what we're consuming is fake. And I don't like the idea that consumers of art aren't allowed to make a distinction between fantasy and reality. I said this in my very first episode, maybe number 2, and I said it in this very show earlier back a while ago, that horror films allow us, viewers, a safe exploration of the dark side of the human condition. And folks, it's a safe exploration because it's not real. When I watched Gaspar Noé's Irreversible, I'd seen Monica Bellucci in other films before that and after that. So, in the back of my mind, it's a given that Ms. Bellucci is not actually being sexually assaulted in that movie. I'm not 5 years old. I know how movies work, meaning that my exploration into that disturbing tale of revenge was neither condoning her character's scripted assault, nor was it condoning the very real sexual assaults that happen all over the world every day, including things of this nature that strike closer to home. The black and white statements that exploration of a bad thing is also approval of that bad thing is too archaic for my taste. If you shut down exploration on the basis that looking into something disturbing always means that you're giving that something your blessing, that right there is more disturbing to me than any movie I've ever seen in my life, and you should go check yourself before you wreck yourself. My friends, thanks for sticking with me on this. I hope your wheels are spinning like mine are whenever I think of this stuff. It's an age-old debate filled with age-old questions, but at the end of the day, when I think of that Facebook group post I made asking if horror can go too far and how, I loved seeing my friends and listeners from all sides of the political spectrum, from various places in the world, agreeing that if horror can indeed go too far, then that's a personal line. That's different for everyone. My final point before the walkthrough has to do with a conversation I had with my buddy Jerry Herring from Kill the Damn Cast. We were on the phone. I guess, we podcast. Look, you should get into podcasts so you can get on the horn with us, because that's what we do. No, Jerry and I were on the phone. We had to talk about some things. And I told him I'd be doing this episode back in like early February. And we launched into a conversation about nonfiction horror. And to that end, I'm not a fan whatsoever of that stuff. I will not go seek out snuff films or even videos where people get injured, like those old what was it, Spike TV, where like you'd see bleachers falling down and 30 people get injured. I don't like to see that stuff. I prefer to keep my horror regulated to the world of fiction. Hell, folks, I took enough psych classes, read enough criminal reports, and saw enough graphic photos and film reels that show the evil human beings can do to one another. And while I never once turned my eyes away in class, I won't turn away. I never once found it alluring beyond a professional fascination. You see crime scene photos, okay, of the aftermath of 2 psycho parents slamming their newborn around a room, including blood on the ceiling where they repeatedly threw this poor little baby. And that's enough to all but neutralize the effects of a certain baby scene that occurs in a Serbian film, because one of these is real, one of these is not. In any case, my repulsion to real-life horror includes things like case studies, documentaries, or even biopics, sorry everybody, on famous serial killers. Is it biopics or biopics? Probably biopics. Yeah. Is it a hyphenated word? Yeah, okay, whatever. And to that end, Jerry brought up, we're talking real-life horror, Jerry brought up the idea that some people are more comfortable watching a movie on a famous serial killer who had real, very real victims, with family members who are still alive to see this evil person glorified on the screen. Yet, a Serbian film is the worst of the 2 options in light of such exploitation or insensitivity. I don't know, just food for thought. And hey, Jerry plans to discuss all that on his own show, so I don't want to step on his toes, more than I already have here. He'll do great at explaining everything. Jerry's a good talker. He'll say everything he wants to say. I just wanted to sort of maybe push people toward that when he's ready to talk on that. Well, all right, folks, this is one topic of discussion in the bank. Love to hear your thoughts on the things we talked about here. It's also incredibly nuanced and complicated that it feels impossible to say everything. But we can at least have a civil discussion about what we can get to, right? Let me issue a warning right here and now to all of you. In just a moment, we're going to get into a spoiler-filled walkthrough of a Serbian film 2010. If you've seen the film, fantastic. If you haven't seen the film but intend to do so, you'll want to stop the podcast here, okay? Watch the film, then come back to this spot. I'll have it timestamped for your convenience. Click it. Clack it, you know how it goes. Now, if you haven't seen the film, and if you have no intention of seeing it, You can turn off the show now, or allow me to challenge you to stick with me through this walkthrough. I think there are things going on in this film that bear some artistic merit and have got some politically charged ideas underneath the controversy. If anything, this will give you the opportunity to get a sense of the movie from afar. You can see it without seeing it, if you will. And I do want to make some things clear here with my examination of this movie. A personal friend of mine astutely wrote on the Facebook group page that since the controversy around this film stems almost completely from how it handles sexual violence, the only panel discussion she would want to hear about this film would require some survivors of sexual assault to handle the themes properly. I think my friend is right about that, but as a friend, she should know that this isn't a panel discussion, you jerk. No, I love you, homie. No, I love you, little homie. No, this is ever a solo cast, and that can be limiting when you're approaching a weighty subject that you might not be able to personally relate to, or even if you do. I think every single person alive faces these limitations. No one can relate to everyone. That said, my intention with this review isn't to I'm not trying to take a micro look into the intimacy of sexual violation. This movie is full of sexual violence, but oddly enough, the emotional depths that come with such a personal trauma aren't deeply explored in the film, nor is it what the film is even trying to go for. Yes, victimhood lies at the heart of a Serbian film's narrative, but at a macro level. And this is why, were I to take on and discuss in depth the nature of sexual abuse, I wouldn't use this film as my catalyst for doing so, not by a mile. Instead, my focus is on why these angry filmmakers used such imagery to make their grand political statements about post-Balkan War Serbia. And there again, if we're talking about how we relate to certain groups of people, I'm not from war-torn Eastern Europe. My friend who wrote in is not from there. I don't know how many people who listen to the show are from there. I'd love to know if you're from Eastern Europe and you're a hot girl, date me. No, I'm playing. No, but listen, my country has never, my country has never been blown to bits, at least not since the Civil War. And it's never been we don't have war on this soil where war transforms our country into something else entirely. So we're all just approaching these political aspects of the text and the best we can from our very limited perspective. Hell, that's how literally everyone approaches everything. So how's this different from any other day, right, my friends? So I just wanted to thank my friend Allison very much for helping me clarify for you listeners the lens I'm using to approach this very difficult film. Allison, you're the best. JNFC for life. All right, folks, we're doing it here and now. So please, my beautiful, wonderful listeners, if you're still here and you find sexual violence triggering, feel free to shut off the show when you hear the audio bumper waiting for us just in a few seconds. See, I intend to handle this review with care. I've never been a crass reviewer, nor would I glorify in the evil acts going on in this film, but I'm also a thorough reviewer, and we're still dealing with some tough subject material here. So, if this is where you exit the train, thank you so much for participating me in the Velvet Buzzsaw review, the topic of discussion. We talked about the LAPLACE'S demon. I will miss you during this walkthrough and analysis, but your mental well-being means more to me than anything in hell. Let's just be honest here. I already got your download. Yeah, we're good, my friends. We're good. And so, with that said, let's now get into this in-depth look at a Serbian film 2010. Directed by Srđan Spasiović and starring Srđan Todorović, Serbian Film tells the story of an aging male porn star who agrees to participate in an art film in order to set his family up for financial stability, but he discovers that he has been drafted into a project worse than anything he could have imagined. Folks, the film opens showing us a three-person family, dad, mom, and little boy. They seem to be happy and doing okay for themselves, but they're struggling financially, and the reason for this is that Milos, the father and our main protagonist for the duration, is a retired adult film actor who was known in his day to be the absolute best at his craft. In fact, throughout the entire film, people regard Milos as a true artist in his field. Regardless of his incredibly large talent, shall we say, Milos and his family are hurting for money and their cash stash is running out. So Milos gets a call and goes to meet up with one of his former lady co-stars, a striking woman named Leia, and she presents him with an opportunity to get back in the business. See, she's working with an adult film production company that is new to Serbia, and they apparently make art films meant for a foreign Western market. Milos is not interested in getting back in the biz, but Leia promises him if he'll just meet a man named Vukmir and get down with his vision, Milos and his family will be set for life. Now our boy Milos, he's not sure what to think about any of this, so he just keeps drinking. They're at this outdoor bar, he's drinking that delicious whiskey. Suddenly, his rich-ass police officer brother Marco shows up at this bar where they are. They chill for a bit. Marco pays for everything, which is great because free drinks are awesome, and then he bounces while Milos considers the opportunity. Later, it's bedtime at the Milos household, and he and his wife are taking it easy, just winding down. Now, I gotta hand it to Maria, Milos' wife, here, because Milos casually throws on one of his old films on the TV while they're in bed, and she doesn't even bat an eyelash about watching what he's doing with all these women on screen. She's just wanting to know if he's gonna take this new opportunity or not. And they talk about this like it ain't no thing, and honestly, that's because in the scheme of their lives, it really ain't no thing, is it? I mean, look, I personally, myself, couldn't stand watching that NC-17 sexy my actress girlfriend did years back when she offhandedly showed it to me one evening, and this was instrumental in our breakup. I mean, and this seems to be a running theme in my life with girls too. I mean, if you heard the interview Jerry from Kill the Cast did with me on his show, you know that back in 2013 I dated a cam girl. Cam girls rock. I just didn't know she was a cam girl at the time, and you know what she did with other people for work? It happened to fall outside my own norm. So I politely broke up with the young lady and she threw cold coffee on me. It was kind of an interesting day. In any case, Milos' wife definitely doesn't have the same hang-ups I do, nor does she have any issues with Milos' past career or any of this. In fact, she really wants him to get back in the biz so they can have that cash. But the deal here is that Maria really does have a certain issue with Milos and his porn past. And it's that she wonders why he never treats her in bed the way he would treat the women he was with on screen. It's not explicitly said, but we viewers can infer that they've got a pretty tame sex life, despite the obvious elephant dong in the room. Right, folks? Right? So Milos hears this concern in his wife's voice, and they talk about it, and so they throw down good and hard in the sack. It's rough stuff, even to the point where you wonder for a second if this treatment is what his wife really wants. But it is, and they bond over it. Legit homies, some of these girls, man, sheesh, it's good stuff. Anyway, Milos still isn't sure what he wants to do, but he does agree to meet up with this Vukmir guy, this filmmaker, to see what he's about. So he rolls up at Vukmir's grand estate, and Vukmir could not be happier to have Milos there. Our girl Leia is already there chilling inside the mansion, brokering the deal between Milos and Vukmir, it seems, and I rather liked how she's in full porn star regalia, looking good, right? In that fishnet bodysuit, right? But while she and Milos are sitting there in Vukmir's office, she's trying to feel our boy up underneath the table, and he ain't having that. We might be delving into a seedy industry here, but our man Milos has got those morals. Morals, folks. So Vukmir starts his pitch to get Milos on board with his production company. And what's the best way to get someone in your pocket? You build them up, man, and that's what Vukmir and Leia are doing here. Vukmir's basically like, you were known as the Balkan sex god, the Nikola Tesla of porn, my man. We need you. I like that Nikola Tesla remark. Leia's laying it on thick about how much of an artist Milos was in his day, and hell, even earlier than this in the film, Milos' wife Maria was like, dude, you're more than just a dumb porn actor. You've got a degree. You're educated. Go for it. Make me proud, G. So Vukmir's deal is that he says that porn can be art if it's done the right way, and Milos is the key. In his view, Serbia isn't a country for real art, which is why they're going for a Western market, and together they can potentially do things that no one else is doing, something way better than normal adult films. Now Milos almost signs Vukmir's contract here, but he's off-put by the fact that he doesn't know a single thing about what Vukmir even wants to do, because apparently, part of the deal is that Milos is not supposed to know what he's taking part in. So Milos gets his ass out of there without signing, and while he's out and about, and he's just sipping some whiskey, he spies this idyllic little family, and you can just hear the wheels turning in his head. He wants what they've got, that security that only financial stability can bring. So Milos decides right then and there, all right, I'm going to sign with Vukmir's production company, and he does. Now you got to understand this, and I'm speaking specifically to the gentleman in the audience right here and now, but look, when you reach a certain age, if you treat yourself poorly enough, maybe it's the drink, maybe it's inactivity, whatever the case, it can be difficult to properly perform in the bedroom. Don't get it twisted, my friends, I don't got that problem, but I'm working on it, though. I'm trying to get that problem. Anyway, because of this, Milos gets himself on a new health regimen. He quits drinking that delicious whiskey, pours sap. He starts exercising, which is a good thing to do. We don't get any Rocky IV style montages here, but we know what's happening. At this point in my notes, it reads, I like that we get to see some good old-fashioned dong right here. And folks, we do. We do. And it's no wonder our boy was famous. All my ladies and gay homies in the house say, ho, right? Man, that's quite a... He's packing heat. So Milos is still prepping himself for filming when his crooked cop brother Marco shows up to the house for dinner. While Milos is out jogging and centering himself, we viewers are watching Marco lust his ass off after his brother's wife. Folks, it gets so bad on his part that he excuses himself to go to the restroom to rub one out really quickly. And I'll admit, we're talking in crass terms here, but I'm attempting to keep this as light as I possibly can because we're headed into the darkness, my friends. So anyway, Marco finishes what he's doing, not in a sock or in that rag your girl keeps by the side of the bed like a respectable gentleman would, but in the bathroom sink. Milos goes to meet with Vukmir again, and as he's walking up to Vukmir's door, we get this strange scene where Milos passes by this bald man who's got bodyguards and is being chauffeured out of there in a nice car. It's really not important in the moment, but the camera really wants us to take note of this bald man for reasons that won't be clear until the final scene of the film. So acknowledge it, now throw it out of your brain. Right here, Milos and Vukmir start talking it out, alright? And we find that in 3 days' time, they will begin filming. Milos is pretty nervous about all this, since Vukmir is keeping him in the dark about what exactly it is they'll be doing, but Vukmir assures him that his clients know what they want and everything will be right as rain. Well, 3 days pass, and Milos is brought by private car to an orphanage for abandoned children, and a man with a strange tattoo gives him an earpiece. It's a lot like Impractical Jokers here, right? Where you gotta do and say whatever the other guys tell you, except this is not in any way, shape, or form a hilarious show about 4 lifelong friends who compete to embarrass each other. Not at all. By the way, Murr from Impractical Jokers wrote a horror novel. We'll talk about that another time. So Milos walks into this orphanage. He's got a cameraman on him, and we viewers are feeling that same intrigue, that same feeling of being kept in the dark that Milos is feeling. What exactly is going on here? Milos is walking through the halls of this place. It's very much like a schoolhouse if you want the proper imagery in your brain. Well, out of nowhere, this sexy lady dressed in pink appears, and she brings Milos to this girl sitting on some steps. Now, I have no idea how to tell how old girls are without asking for ID. Trust me, you get one 19-year-old who buys you a beer at a bar, and it's just all a mystery, and it's all downhill from there. And hell, we've got that Pen 15 show where a girl my age, I mean, she's in her 30s, is playing a 13-year-old. Okay. In any case, I guess this girl Milos is looking at is somewhere between 12 and 16 max. Well, homies, as Milos stands there, wondering what's going on, this girl legit smiles at him rather too knowingly, right before her mother bounces up in there yelling at her and dragging her out the building. It's an odd scene for sure, but in Milos's earpiece, Vukmir's voice says, "Bravo." So we as viewers and Milos are like, bravo for what? What's going on? Well, come the next day, they're back at the orphanage once more. That young girl's there, and like before, her mother shows up just yelling, smacking her around before getting her out of there. Also like before, our sexy pink-clad lady's there, and she takes Milos into a side room there in the orphanage and proceeds to seduce him. It's going more or less as these adult films might, and if you're in Milos's head, he's probably thinking, okay, finally something is making some damn sense. But then things get weird. As they stand there in this dark room, cameras on them, our pink lady begins filleting our protagonist, a necessary hallmark act of foreplay to initiate the biological act of coitus, right? I mean, isn't this how it goes with these types of productions? Well, as she's knelt down doing her part, as it were, we've got these 2 screens that light up on the wall in front of Milos. And on these 2 screens, we see what I would consider to be the first truly disturbing thing in this movie so far. If you watched the UK cut, this next sequence might play out strangely, and it could be easy to miss what's going on. If, however, you watched the uncut version that I'm reviewing here and now, it will be at this point that the film begins to live up to its title as one of the more disturbing horror movies ever made. The deal here is that nothing actually happens. It's really a trick of how you use editing to propel a story. You can film a man shooting a firearm at a gun range, right? You can then shoot completely unrelated footage of a guy in a Make America Great Again hat looking happy. Or you can shoot unrelated footage of a 300-pound progressive lady looking angry. All you have to do to create your working gun narrative is just to properly edit and slice that footage, splice it in where you want it. Oh, you got a man shooting a gun? Well, just edit in a dirty old Republican to show your bias. Or show that same man shooting that gun and throw in a radical feminazi looking on disapprovingly, and you just got your narrative on fleek? Is that... I don't know if I used that right. Anyway, I say all that to say that we're hitting the tough stuff, folks. Think about editing techniques as I described this. So as the pink lady is working on Milos from down below, he's standing there with two screens in front of him. Both of these have that young, obviously underage girl on them. On one screen, she's doing her makeup. On the other, she's eating a popsicle. Neither of these things are suggestive in the slightest, although I would argue that this girl, whose name is Jaka, is 100% in on what this evil production company is up to. But that aside, putting on makeup and eating popsicles are perfectly fine things for young teen girls to do. But the second you juxtapose these images with scenes of two adults engaging in consensual sex, you're causing the viewer to create certain mental connections, especially if you get all Freudian on everyone and equate the phallic nature of fellatio with the phallic nature of popsicles. Right? Y'all tracking with me right now? How crass and obvious do I gotta get? Pink lady sucking one thing, the young girl Jaka is doing the same to an ice cream bar. One is innocent, one is not, but there again, the way this film goes, I'm not convinced anything is innocent here. Anyway, when the sequence reaches its climax, as it were, the editing here creates an all too suggestive picture where we've got Milos finishing his work up with the pink lady right as the film cuts to young Jaka finishing up with the popsicle. And the imagery here couldn't be any clearer and outrageous. Here, it cuts to Milos at home, and he's back on that delicious whiskey again. He couldn't keep off it. He's not happy with what's going on, by the way, so he calls up his brother Marco to look into who this Vukmir guy is. Marco says he'll comply, but then as they hang up, we find out a lot more about Marco than meets the eye. I mean, we already know the man is a well-to-do, corrupt cop who wants his brother's wife, right? But as this next scene plays out, we see Marco hanging up on Milos, and he's in bed with this woman doing the nasty. Fine, grown-ups doing grown-up things. I'm not judging, but I'm judging now, because while she's helping a brother out, as it were, good girl, you gotta love those girls who do that, he's fixated on the TV. Some couples use pornography to help get the fires going. Not abnormal. Cool. But he's watching one of Milos's family videos of Peter's birthday that's recorded over one of Milos's old adult films. Twisted stuff here, folks. The family video does end, and it goes to the adult film originally on the tape, but it's clear here that Marco is envious of his brother in some markedly profound ways. First, he wants Milos's family life. Second, he's jealous that his brother had such incredible endurance in his films. It was said earlier in the film that Milos's artistry was all done in one take, which is why he was in such high demand. And it seems that Marco does not like this one bit. After shooting down his former co-star, Leia once again, Milos has yet another day of shooting. This time, he's brought blindfolded into a dark room where the mother of that young girl, Jaka, is being beaten by one of this production company's police-like figures. And he's doing this to her because by prostituting herself, she's dishonoring the memory of her late husband who was a war hero. So after this beatdown, she's all bloodied up, but she's instructed to fillet Milos. But as she's doing this, he looks across this big dark room and sees little Jaka, this woman's daughter, just chilling, watching the whole thing going down like it's good old-fashioned fun. So Milos ain't having this, but that cop-like guy who's beating up the girl, not the little girl, but who's beating up the mom, starts holding him and won't let him go while bad things are happening downstairs, if you know what I mean. Hell, guys, she starts biting it. But in any case, Milos is forced to completion against his will, which is a most interesting sexual violation if you ask me. In fact, neither Milos nor this woman want this act to happen. There's more than a suggestion of coercion here for both of them. The only people who appear to be enjoying what's happening are the cop-like man and the daughter Jaka, who looks on the whole time approvingly. While Vukmir enters the room super happy, saying bravo, he's pleased at their filmmaking today. Milos is not though, so after punching out that guard guy, and he expresses concern for Jaka, but Vukmir's like, yo, she's one of mine, and she's safe. Vukmir is then like, look bro, that girl's mom is into some super rough stuff, so it's all good, and let's not forget about that thing you did to the midget years back. Now, one could only guess what that was all about. It had something to do with trapping the little person in an oven. They don't really go much more into it, but I guess so that happened. Anyway, the film keeps going, and we come to find from Miloš's brother Marko that Vukmir was once a psychologist who worked in children's TV once upon a time ago, as well as in state security. Well, Miloš is done with all this, so he goes to Vukmir's mansion to quit, and Vukmir just goes on this rant about how Serbia is just one big kindergarten who the parents have abandoned. He's even claiming to be the backbone of this country's economy. As far as how it all relates to adult film, Vukmir asserts that it's all about the life, the flesh and soul of a victim, sold to those who watch in comfort. Victim is the priciest sell in the world. In Serbia, nothing but victims. Allow me, Vukmir says, to show you the power of a real victim. You've all likely heard about this next scene even if you haven't seen it, but Vukmir dims the lights, flips on a TV, and here we watch a woman give birth to a baby in fairly graphic detail, crowning and all. Well, next, and prepare yourselves folks, we see the man with the strange tattoo from earlier, obviously a member of this dark production company, deliver this baby, spank it to life as doctors do, and then he proceeds to sexually abuse the infant while the mother looks on, smiling. Miloš is sickened by the whole thing and walks right out of the place while Vukmir is yelling all about how they've invented a new genre called newborn porn. Truly grotesque stuff from a truly grotesque man, and Miloš sees this clearly. Well, as Miloš is driving through the city, he's gone now, he's driving through the city, things start going blurry. It's very likely that while drinking delicious whiskey with Vukmir, he's been drugged, and then a hot woman shows up out of nowhere on the streets, goes up to the car, some fondling happens, and then bam, Miloš passes out and wakes up all bloodied up in his bed. He can't find his family anywhere, and his condition is bad enough that he's urinating blood. Yikes. At this, Miloš drives to Vukmir's estate, grabs a tire iron out to beat some ass, walks right up in there, only to find the place empty. Miloš gives the place a quick once-over and finds a room with bloodied up walls and a bed in the center of the room. And we know Miloš has got some gaps in his memory, and the rest of the film plays out in such a way that this lost time, as it were, all comes crashing back to him slowly. Right here and now, Miloš suddenly remembers that the woman he'd been fondling in the car right before he blacked out had brought him here to this room in cuffs and had drugged him to make him hypersexual, uncontrollably sexual even. Here, they bring in Jaka's mom. From before, they strip Miloš down and prompt them to start getting it on. Now in his earpiece, it's all Impractical Jokers again without the impractical jokes and the four cool guys. Vukmir's telling Miloš that this woman is trash, that she's done horrible things to children, and that it's alright to smack her around. Well, since Miloš is all drugged up and under duress and is pretty much unable to control himself, he does what Vukmir says all the way up to the point of beheading this woman while they're in the middle of the act. And he's still going at it. So crash back to the present. Miloš is not happy about this memory, but there's still too many missing pieces, so he keeps searching around the mansion and finds a cabinet full of videotapes. On one of them we got some implied bestiality, on another Miloš sees a video scene of himself, a scene that we've already seen earlier in the film, and then most horribly, we all get to see a tape of what happened right after the decapitation of the woman in the now bloodied up room. The henchman who Miloš had punched out earlier is recording himself raping Miloš while he's unconscious. It's pretty dark stuff, folks, but it doesn't stop there. Next scene shows his old co-star Leia having an argument with Vukmir about how what Vukmir is doing is not art, and then it cuts to Leia all chained up in this disgusting room. We see that her teeth have all been removed with pliers, and she's all messed up and held captive here. The video concludes with the entry of a mysterious masked man who suffocates Leia to death with his junk, and as much as you want her to bite it off to defend herself, we quickly realize that she can do no such things because of the lack of teeth, and she dies. So these videos that Miloš is watching contain one awful revelation after another, and it doesn't stop at Leia's death via that masked man. The next video shows Miloš at Jaka's house, that little girl. They're in a quaint living room, sitting on a couch. Jaka and her grandmother are there, sitting by Miloš while the film crew stands about capturing everything. What Miloš and we viewers find out is that this grandmother is happy that they killed Jaka's mom, so their house can be pure again. Miloš can now be the man of the family, and as such, he'll get to deflower Jaka just as her own father had done for her when she was young. And this is the grandmother talking. So she's basically like, hey, Jaka, your new dad, Milos, can, get you started just like my dad did when I was a kid. Yay, for family tradition. So the sickest part is that Milos is the only person in the room who is not down with any of this. So he pieces out by diving out a window and taking off. So our boy's on the run. He obviously needs some help, so he calls his brother Marco to rescue him while he hides out in an alleyway. Now, as you can no doubt tell, there isn't much that's terribly humorous about this film, but this scene here that happens next did get a laugh from me. So while Milos is waiting for his brother, it's nighttime now, in case you're curious of the passage of time since he escaped Jaka's house, and it's nighttime and he sees these young dudes harassing this incredibly gorgeous young woman. Now, bear in mind, Milos is still under the influence of that hyper-sex drug that he'd been given, so he sees this sexy lady walking across the street and he just goes ahead, whips it out, and starts beating the proverbial meat, as it were. Now, as he's doing this, though, it's revealed that this woman, this girl, is actually underage, so the dudes who are harassing her see Milos with his dong in hand cross the street and start beating the hell out of him. I thought this scene had a certain dark levity to it, and I liked it. Well, as it happens, this beating and Milos's escape are short-lived because Vukmir's men show up, kill everyone there, and kidnap Milos again. With his memory now in place, Milos is able to trace his steps, so to speak, to a warehouse of sorts where Vukmir had taken him before. Once there, his memories hit him all over again. You gotta understand that Milos still isn't sure exactly how he got home earlier that morning, so he's still filling in the blanks, and it would seem that the final piece of the puzzle lies here in this warehouse. Milos goes in and sees carnage everywhere, and his memories come flooding back. What had happened goes as follows. After being picked up in the alley by Vukmir's men, Milos is brought to this place, this warehouse. The lady from before, who we've seen several times already, drugs Milos up again with a fresh batch of that sex drug, but he gets the upper hand, manages to grab one of the full syringes of that drug, and he pounds her in the neck with it, downing her instantly. Before escaping, however, Milos runs into that henchman from before who had sexually assaulted him, and he's brought naked and drugged, of course, into a large room with a bed in the center, and there's a camera set up. On this bed are two unconscious bodies covered up, but not from the waist down. So even though Milos has no idea who these people even are, the drug fuels him to go to the bed, and he begins having sex with one of the anonymous figures. He switches it up here, and in his frenzy, he proceeds to have sex with the other of the two anonymous figures, and due to the disgusting wonders of good sound design, the film implies that Milos is having some difficulty with this figure due in part to his large size, as it were. Next to him, the man in the mask who had killed his friend Leia appears, and while Milos is busy doing his thing, this masked guy starts on the other body in the bed. Most production stills you'll see of this film will feature imagery from this scene. Milos next to this masked man in shirtless torso upshots. Now, Vukmir and his men have been present this entire time, of course, orchestrating everything, and in what first-time viewers will see as a big reveal, Vukmir unmasks our masked man, and it's Milos's brother Marco. Milos is surprised, but he's still in a drug-induced frenzy, so he's still doing what he's doing, even as Vukmir removes the blanket off the figure that Marco is having sex with. And in yet another big reveal, we see that it is Milos's wife, Maria. Now, maybe you've heard or read about what comes next, but people viewing this for the first time are likely to put two and two together, so it almost comes as no real shock when Vukmir uncovers the face of the figure Milos is engaged with, and it's Milos's little son, Peter. Vukmir proclaims the words, "A real, happy Serbian family," with far too much glee. And here, a whole mess of things kinda happen at once. We see that Milos's wife is awake and knows what's going on. We see Milos's utter horror that all this is going down, that he's been tricked like this. The doctor lady, who'd been drugging Milos up, the same woman who Milos had stabbed in the neck with a syringe, walks in the room with a bloody crotch, just overdosing like mad on this drug, and she's in bad condition carrying a bloody lead pipe that we can infer she used on herself sexually under control of the drug. Right? And the pipe is bloody too, you see what I'm saying? Everyone's shocked to see her there, so Milos uses this distraction to his advantage, jumps on Vukmir and proceeds to bash his head into the concrete floor over and over. Vukmir bleeds out and dies here, but not before happily saying, "That's cinema." Even his own death is worthwhile to him, if only because he's getting precisely what he wanted from the beginning, right? It's crazy. Anyway, while this is happening, Maria has strength enough to bite out Marco's throat right before smashing his head in with a marble sculpture that was kind of there just as handy set design. Now Milos, enraged beyond all hope at this point, gets a gun off one of the henchmen in the room and just starts blasting everyone away. The only man left standing when he runs out of bullets is the bald driver man who had abused the infant earlier in that infamous scene. Well, in a bit of crazy, ironic payback, Milos stabs this man through the eye socket, not with a knife or any other such implement of penetrative death, but using his own hefty dong. Yup, right through the skull. One could argue this movie's off the rails at this point, but the bloodshed ends with Milos needing to knock Maria, his wife, out because in her own frenzy she was about to stab him. So now everything we've got in this scene, the film's climax here, is essentially the last of Milos's memories that has hit him as he's standing in this empty warehouse. All the blanks have been filled in, and they're awful, awful blanks. Well, Milos leaves this place and heads to what I take to be one of Vukmir's safe houses where he'd stashed Maria and Peter after having left the warehouse post-massacre, right? Next, we see Milos and his family. They're back at home, absolutely traumatized from what's happened. We get a discordant, out-of-tune version of the theme that's played throughout the film going on. Hell, even the music is telling us that nothing is alright anymore. I believe that viewers might get the impression that little Peter doesn't quite know what's gone on since he was drugged up so much, so that's good, but even he's got himself a good, well-earned 1,000-yard stare. A lot of bad things have happened to this poor kid. Well, here though, we see Maria smiling as Milos loads a gun, and they three huddle together in bed while Milos fires a fatal shot through himself, his wife, and Peter all at once, effectively ending all their lives. This denouement is bad enough, right? But here in this final scene, the important bald man we saw earlier in the film, the man Milos noticed at Vukmir's estate, he walks in the bedroom with the film crew, stands over Milos's, Maria's, and Peter's dead bodies, and tells them to start with the little one. And that there, my friends, is our horror corridor summary, I guess you could call it, of a Serbian film 2010. At this point, I'd like for us to get into what this film means, what the filmmakers are trying to say here. We've got 4 points to hit if we're going to do this right, so here's how it's going to go. Number 1, I'm going to go on a quick rant. Number 2, we're going to get into the filmmakers' heads by looking at how Serbia's Milosevic regime shaped their nationalist views, which ultimately brought a Serbian film into being. Number 3, we'll go over a painfully brief history of the Serbian film industry, like painfully brief, homies. And number 4, we'll finally see what the filmmakers themselves, writer-director Srđan Spasojević and co-writer Aleksandar Radivojević, say about their own work before I give you all my final thoughts and rating. And then we say doviđenja to one another. Sound good, folks? Okay, number 1 of 4, I gots to rant. I'm bout it. So I understand that this is a shocking movie full of transgressive imagery. Some of the worst things imaginable play out plain as day here. But let me ask you something. Is it all senseless? Is there no rhyme or reason here? And hell, homies, aren't those fair questions to ask when faced with something this controversial? Look, I want to draw a big, fat line in the sand here and say that I 100% believe that there is a purpose here. You don't have to like it. You don't even have to believe it. But that doesn't change anything. The fact is that this movie has got a lot lying beneath the surface, and so when I read reviews, reactions, or general comments that are outright dismissive of the fact that this film has a message, I get a little bit irritated. For example, Spooky Astronauts, which is one of my absolute favorite horror review channels on YouTube, top 3 easily, gave a Serbian film a favorable review. And folks, if you don't know about Spooky Astronauts, you need to get with the program. Emma, the Spooky Astronaut herself, is an Australian-based critic, and if you're listening to this now and you're thinking about starting up with YouTube, you need to look at what she's doing and take notes, because she's murdering the competition. She's charismatic, incredibly sharp, very well spoken. She has awesome hair and says words like no as no, which I find great because accents are awesome. Basically, she rocks, and you all need to sub to her channel. That's Spooky Astronauts. In the past, I've mentioned it to my Australian listeners that I want to pay you all a visit one day, and if I do, we gotta hit Emma up, get her bearded boyfriend Dean along, grab a couple gallons of whiskey, a shelf of horror movies, and go on a bender. Melanie from Melbourne, already said she'll host if I show up to Austria, so we've got a potential Australian party going down, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So Spooky Astronaut Emma gave A Serbian Film a good review. Great video, loved it, just watched it today as of this recording. And while cruising through the comments section of her video, I came across the usual crowd of folks who refused to accept that A Serbian Film could possibly have something of value to say. One of these people wrote the following: "I don't believe the rubbish about it being symbolic of the situation in Serbia. If child rape is the only way they can portray that message, then they're severely lacking in imagination." Another person wrote, "I watched it and didn't think there was an excuse for any of it, especially the penultimate scene. I don't mind disturbing movies, but I didn't see any reason for the movie to even exist. It wasn't entertaining, it didn't teach me anything, it was just unpleasant. What possible excuse is there for a Serbian film?" Someone then replies to this comment saying, "Exactly. The director of this film has used the old chestnut of it's an allegory of all the horrors that were going on in Serbia at the time of the conflicts there." So, okay. You know, folks, my goal here is never to disparage people with these opinions. I can understand why someone would find this film reprehensible because it is. But my irritation has more to do with the idea that just because something is offensive, it's therefore devoid of meaning. Basically, I will 100% combat that kind of dismissive mindset here as we get into the meat of this film's underlying themes. And here's the deal. I don't need to be mean when I say that I disagree with their ignorance about these things. Sometimes when art shocks people, it leaves a mark that blinds us to what the art is doing beyond the shock factor. I get it, I really do. You kind of have to train yourself psychologically to look under the skin of an art piece if you really want to talk intelligently about said art piece to an audience, be that audience in the comment section of YouTube or here on a podcast, right? Well, here and now, my friends, we'll start diving into the film's central themes. If you look at the show notes for this episode, you'll see that I've included links to several academic writings on this film. Some of it is lengthy and heavy reading, but if you're wondering where I'm getting some of the ideas I'm coming up with here, it's not all just me waxing intellectual on the mic. If you've ever written college papers, you know damn well that you've got to have sources backing up your talk. And the fact is that this film has been the subject of much discussion in academia, so let's see what these people think, especially in light of the fact that director Spasojevic has been pretty clear in interviews as to what his thoughts are on his movie. A good place to preface this discussion before we get into the second of our 4 points here would be in talking about how exactly people go about viewing this film. It's all about providing context. In Volume 15, issue number 2 of an academic rag out of the UK called Participations, Journal of Audience and Reception Studies, an author conducted a study all about who exactly the audience of a Serbian film is and about the phenomenon of anti-fandom. You know, when people going in hating before they, know anything about it. You know those types. Sipping that haterade. Well, hell, this paper even draws parallels between haters of a Serbian film and haters of the Twilight Saga. Truly fascinating stuff, homies. It's a dense read, but it's rewarding. I particularly enjoyed the fact that young men who watch this movie alone are thought by those polled in the study to be dangerous viewers. Mr. Watson looks nervously from side to side. Anyway, a link to the study is in the show notes. But here's the $64 question, my G's. When people set out to view this movie, how are they going about this task mentally? For some, viewing this movie is a badge of honor. You get to proudly proclaim that you survived a Serbian film. For others, it's a badge of honor of a whole different kind. And by that, I mean to say that this crowd watches the movie for the sole purpose of expressing their distaste of it, a way to establish some moral high ground, if you will. Some out there watch because they actively want to see pedophilia, necrophilia, rape, all that. Some enjoy the challenge of testing themselves in the face of extreme cinema, and of course there are those who, like me, watch with the intention of getting to the bottom of the message that stands behind the controversy. Now, why am I going on about how different people go into this film? Well, we're talking context here. And if we're going to have a conversation about what this film means, we need to establish a frame of reference. We need to shed light on why Srđan Spasojevic and Aleksandar Radivojevic would make this film. I'm not saying you have to like this movie. I am saying that there's something here worth investigating that takes precedence, in my opinion, over purely emotional reactions that refuse to acknowledge that, love it or hate it, this film has something to say. So, no matter how you went into this film when you first saw it, let's all at least try for the duration of this show to get on the same page and make what feeble attempts we can to make sense of a Serbian film's crazy world. Are you with me, folks? I sure hope you are, and if indeed you are, we've got my context rant out of the way, step 1 of 4 in the bank. Let's now move on to step 2 of 4 and talk about Serbia itself. Now, it's got to be understood that the filmmakers have clearly stated that they didn't go into a Serbian film with any intention of making a political statement one way or the other, but that it's also impossible not to be touched by the political atrocities they grew up with, the perversion of authoritarian power under the Milosevic regime. And that's just it. Our primary filmmakers here, Spasojevic and Radivojevic, grew up in Serbia in the Milosevic era, and for a great many of us listening here, that might not mean a whole hell of a lot. But for these people who lived in that part of the world at that time, the Milosevic years are full of death, rape, war, and trauma. And even if Milosevic himself as dictator/president wasn't necessarily at the center of all of it, as some claim, it still stands to reason that under his leadership we had a Serbian state that became criminalized, a society that followed suit, and awful things happened as a result of this man's paranoid desire to rule. As it stands today, there was a sort of war-like internalized national identity that comes along with living in present-day Serbia, the aftermath of real-life nationwide horror. It's like I said before. With the Milosevic regime came a time of mass death across the 6 different regions that were once Yugoslavia, Serbia being one of these, and growing up I would hear all about the Bosnian War, the conflicts in Kosovo, the prison camps, the ethnic cleansing, the genocide, that 11-week NATO bombing. I mean, we're talking between 130 to 140,000 people killed over this time, and millions of people displaced and seeking refuge. I mean, hell homies, I still get sad as hell when I think of 9/11, but as bad as that was for us here in the US, it's a drop in the ocean compared to what goes on in these war-torn regions of the world, and I count myself fortunate that I live where I do. Truly, my friends, I do. The fact that this Yugoslav war is considered to be Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II is something that we must consider when thinking about the art coming out of Serbia. Okay, so one of the academic papers I used in my research here is one you typically have to pay a hell of a lot of money to get, so shout out to one of my old professors for hooking a gangsta up for free. But in this paper, which I've cited in my show notes, the authors assert that war is a kind of existential condition that pervades everyday life for these folks. Here is an excerpt from Mark Featherstone's and Beth Johnson's academic paper, The Horror of a National Thing in a Serbian Film. They write, "The Serbs were able to live in a horrific dream world, a postmodern televised atrocity exhibition characterized by the idea of war as some kind of existential ethno-national mission. In this distorted world, scenes of rape, violence, and disaster were broadcast to the masses in order to create the illusion that Serbia was the victim of a global conspiracy. Moreover, this notion of a global conspiracy and the idea that Serbia was fighting for its life was perfectly reflective of the general state of everyday life inside Serbian society. In the criminal state, where everything was permitted, nothing worked, and survival became everything." They go on to write, "Driven by desperate social and economic conditions, and encouraged by the principle of compulsory excessive enjoyment, the masses easily embraced the darkness of the will, so perfectly captured by a Serbian film." So, the fact that the Yugoslav war we're referencing here is considered to be Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II is something that we must consider when thinking about what's in these filmmakers' heads, as well as what the nature of the art is that's coming out of modern Serbia, okay? Said that earlier, I'm saying it now again. That right there is point 2 of my 4 points, done and done. Rant, check. Serbia conflict, check. Let's now take an all too quick look at Serbia's film industry, which is my 3rd of our 4 points to cover in order to gain a measure of understanding about this film. In the show notes for this episode, you'll see among these articles a great in-depth academic piece about Serbia's film market. It's entitled, "Understanding a Serbian Film: The Effects of Censorship and File Sharing on Critical Reception and Perceptions of Serbian National Identity in the UK by Alexandra Kapka." And with a title that long, I can't promise you that the rest of it's, all short and sweet, but I did the reading so you don't have to, even though you maybe should. But alright, here's the deal. Before Milosevic came to power in 1989, we had Josip Broz Tito, who was, I like saying that, who was the ruler in charge of the region. So back in the day, we're talking right after World War II, our boy Tito's like, look everyone, from now on, if you're making films up in this gangsta, it's gonna be propagandist in nature, or I'm gonna ghost your ass with my 9. And so this meant that genre films in Serbia are kicked out the door because genre is a product of the West, the US, and screw that. If we're gonna have a society of self-management, as it were, where we're gonna make ourselves look great to the people, there ain't no room for junk like that. Fantasy movies? Nah, banned. Why? Because that's promoting a longing for a time before Serbia's communist rule, duh. You want a thriller, horror, or sci-fi flick maybe? Nope, outlawed. Why? Because there's no place for that dark shit in this new and bright rosy future that lies ahead of us as a nation. Hell folks, to this day, there are only like a couple dozen horror films that have come out of Serbia. Their first slasher was TT Syndrome from 2002, for heaven's sakes. Peep this though, my friends. All you're getting from the Serbian film machine at this point are partisan war films, family comedies, and social dramas. Now let's fast forward our asses to the Milosevic era, and the Balkan Wars pretty much crippled the film industry in Serbia. You want state funding? Sorry, ain't happening, son, there ain't no money. So this forced artists to look to the West for financing. But if you're going for these Western dollars, you gotta paint the right picture that foreign audiences want to see, right? This pretty much means selling your national tragedies to the highest bidder. Now, let's fast forward to the 21st century here. No more Milosevic, no more communism. There are now very few actual laws about what can be filmed and presented in Serbia. They don't have the MPAA breathing down their necks, but there's this internalized post-communist mindset going on still. The state might not be forcing artists to create propaganda films anymore. The state might not be paying for these films, but the state is still by and large in the collective consciousness of these people. When your own national identity is weighed against the identity foreigners think you've got, when you consider that Serbia's film industry is essentially controlled financially by the West, what spawns is the rise of a PC culture that seeks to present Serbian art in a particular fashion. Want a dope-ass example of what I mean by this? Fine, here we go. I was at a bar the other week, and this girl next to me took like maybe 20 selfies over and over. Literally, we counted, we were making fun of her because just selfies over and over, and we got to like 18 to 20 of them. She's just trying to get that right pose, okay? That right angle. Throw the appropriate Instagram filter on that, crop it how you want, and you've got the perfect spur of the moment photo, right? Hashtag no makeup, hashtag blessed. You feeling me here? Are we getting an idea of what it's like to be a filmmaker in Serbia? You pretty much can't get a film made there without bowing to the Western finance folks and without selling the right Serbian story. I'm not saying these films are good or bad either, folks, but what do these parameters, these boundaries, mean to artists who want to be fully honest about what's going on around them? Let's talk about this more as we get into our fourth and final point in this section of the show. Point number 1, rant. Check, we did that. Point number 2, Serbian war conflicts. Check, we did that. Point number 3, Serbia film industry talk. Check. And now, number freaking 4. Let's talk about what Srđan Spasojević and Aleksandar Radivojević have to say about their own film. Homies, look, we could have started with this, couldn't we? I could have just done my film summary and gone right here like, alright folks, and here's what the filmmakers have to say for themselves. But just like I said in my rant, there are people who outright do not want to buy the idea that this film has meaning to it. These are people who heard, all they did was hear that this movie was controversial. They read the title, not the article. Just the title of a bloody, disgusting article that maybe said something about how a Serbian film is a political story. They watched a Serbian film and then in comfortable Western fashion said, this film shouldn't exist because bad things happen in it. Well, once again, I'm not saying you have to like this film. I'm not saying you should even watch it. But if you want me to take you seriously in an intelligent discussion of this film, then get on the horror corridor train and let's see what's going down here. And the only way to really do that, the only way to understand this film that many tout as the most disturbing horror movie ever made, only way to do that is you gotta have a sense about where and when this film was made, which we just established. Only then will the why this film was made make any kind of real sense. So let's talk about what our two primary filmmakers have to say for themselves. I'll throw up some links in the show notes to several interviews I've enjoyed here and there where the director and his co-writer talk explicitly about the film, and it might surprise you all to find that these are well-spoken, fiercely intelligent, thoughtful, and polite gentlemen. Let me read for you all a couple excerpts from interviews these guys have done to show you all what's on their minds here. First, I for Film did an interview with Spasojević, which is maybe my favorite interview with him. Allow me to highlight a couple of questions they asked him because his answers are brilliant. The first question was, your film is set in a stylized world of pornography. What do you regard as the role of pornography in your film? And, although I realize this is a ridiculous question, do you regard your own film as in any way pornographic itself? Spasojević replies, absolutely not. I don't regard it as pornographic. First of all, a crazy thing, there are no pornographic shots in the film. No penetration or no explicit pornographic shots. On the other hand, this was one of the major metaphorical takes in this film, to treat pornography as real life. Because in the last few decades of political nightmares in this region and several wars, we've brought ourselves to the point where we consider our lives as pure exploitation. In order to lead a normal life, you have to become a prostitute and sell your soul and your ass to the highest bidder in the name of feeding your family and be viciously exploited by your boss and the rulers of your destiny. So, the pornographic issue in the sense of pornography in the film is used just like our everyday life. Any kind of job you can get, you can be viciously exploited. Folks, how does this not sound like the Western financed Serbian film industry as it is right now? It's a perfect metaphor, it really is, and if you want to talk about how a criminalized government screws its people, the metaphor only solidifies. Epsiode talks about how this isn't meant to be a documentary about what's going on in Serbia, but that it's global in scale. In an interview with Electric Chic, he clarifies this, saying, "This film is an honest expression of the deepest feelings that we have about our region and the world in general. Concerning our region, the last few decades have been dominated by war and political and moral nightmares. The world in general is sugar-coated in political correctness, but it is actually very rotten under that facade. So, we're talking about problems in the modern world, only they're set in Serbia, and it's a struggle against all the corrupt authorities that govern our lives for their own purposes." Folks, you cannot tell me that's not a powerful artistic position, but let's keep going. In this interview, they ask specifically about the treatment of women and children in the film, and Epsiode handles this question wonderfully, saying, "You cannot fight against that kind of violence if you don't say anything about it. You will not prevent it if you say, for instance, in this company you have to have 50% of women managers. Fine, but that will not solve the problem of domestic violence. In Serbia, in some rural parts of the country, we have big domestic violence problems. Women and children are treated like men's property. Men can do whatever they want with them. Of course, there are problems of that type all over the world, but in some regions, it's almost a tradition, and the written law is not helping because in reality, no one does anything about it. We wanted to talk about all the problems we experience. We wanted to face the demons of our time, including violence against women and children. Unfortunately, many people who say they are fighting against those problems and claim to represent women and children find this film too offensive." So wait, are you telling me that a Serbian film carries within it an anti-violent message that would appeal to Western, progressive, even feminist thinkers? Imagine that. Imagine using hardcore imagery to make a statement. Reminds me of a quote from Batman Begins where I think it was either Bruce Wayne or Alfred says that extreme examples will shock people out of their apathy. Interesting, right? So are we getting somewhere here, my friends? Because I feel like we are. In another interview I've got on lock, Epsiode addresses a major talking point about this film which comfortable Westerners miss completely. Essentially, the belief is that this film condones what it's showing. I promise you all that I will touch on this subject in another of my projects I've got coming down the line, but who cares about any of that right now? If you make a violent film, whether fun or not, if someone sees it and believes you condone death as a fun or sensationalist thing, you've got to respond to that type of thinking. Well, I don't know if you all know it or not, but this film is controversial, and people think this film is promoting the violence it's depicting. To that, Epsiode is shocked. I'll paraphrase him, but he addresses this like, you guys, the bad guys do bad things, and the good guy fights against it. We're not glorifying what evil people do. We hate that shit. It's defined us horribly as a nation. The problem is that because we're angry about this state-sanctioned PC culture, this deception, this soul-selling business, this violence of war, the idea that the West wants our pain so they can feel something, the problem is that we've got this broken system and it'll never be fixed. That's what he's saying. Hell, in a recent interview with Epsiode, someone asked him what he'd change about this film this many years later, and he's like, "Homie, I don't feel like I did a good enough job showing how evil people can be. I'd make them worse if I could make this film now." Man. So, we are dangerously close to ending this episode, my friends, which means getting into my own final thoughts and my rating of this movie, but I've got one more excerpt of an interview to read here. This time, it's from the co-writer of the film, Aleksandar Radivojević. He says of the Serbian people, "We're slaves to political correctness. That in itself is a form of violence, of submission, promoting freedom but stopping anyone who wants to do something different, which is seen in a bad light by the establishment. As we're getting closer to Europe, films are becoming more uniform. Creativity is stifled and everything is hypocrisy. Here, they want people who support the system and they want talentless people to do that." He goes on to talk about the Serbian youth, saying, "Young people who are messing around in the streets today grew up in the hell of the war, and no one was taking care of them. They're depressed, unsatisfied, and repressed. The majority of them are illiterate in the sense that they don't know how to write or read. Do you understand? Those who aren't illiterate are overpaid. For example, professors who should be passing on their passion for their subjects simply aren't doing so because they've got their own problems to resolve. Young Serbs are living freaks. They're the first to know that their parents would have aborted them if they had the money to. It's difficult to be optimistic." My friends, this is powerful stuff we're talking about here. My hope at this point is that through all our talk in this episode so far, we're able to put this film into perspective. My other hope is that people who dismiss this film as senseless, meaningless, or, to call back to the article from earlier, horror for horror's sake, will see that a tremendous amount of thought, care, anger, and pain was poured into the creation of a Serbian film. Given what we know about the Yugoslav wars and how they continue to influence the national identity of the Serbian people, notably Serbian filmmakers, this movie makes a lot of real sense. Well, we've gone through the film. We've hit those 4 points I wanted to take you all through in order to provide context. I guess that means we've reached the home stretch, home slice, which means all we got left is for me to give you, friends and listeners, my final thoughts and my rating of A Serbian Film, 2010. My friends, may I ask you a question, a sincere question? Have you ever been so angry, so furious about something that has happened to you, that if your thoughts could be broadcast to the world, they'd be the darkest, most vile, enraged, violent, messed up things imaginable? I think most of us have been in that dark place where the world inside our minds just goes pitch black. I experienced a personal betrayal once, as I'm sure a great many of us have. And this situation put me in such a state that I wrote a song about it. No one in the world has heard this song, and no one ever will. The lyrics and the chords aren't written down anywhere. There is no proof in the universe that this song exists. It's all in my head, where it belongs. Folks, if you were to hear this song, or even if you were to merely find the lyrics on a scrap of paper left on a coffee shop table or something, you would wonder who the psycho was who had written something so vile and gross. The deal, though, was that I needed to let off steam. I needed an outlet. I needed to process what had happened and how I felt about it. Now, imagine someone feeling that way, that angry, that passionate about letting their intense feelings be known through art, except they don't care about keeping that piece of art a secret. They want it out there for everyone to see. I think this film is very much like that pitch black thing inside of someone's mind that we normally shouldn't be let in on, except this time, we're allowed that peek behind the curtain. Folks, I believe this film has very real value to it that is unfortunately difficult to see behind the powerfully shocking imagery we get throughout, but I would argue that the appalling things that take place in the story actually add to that value rather than take from it. I believe the role pornography plays in the film as a metaphor for the exploitation of victims is solid, but more to the point, I applaud this movie for exploring how authoritarianism and market forces work to destroy lives. In the end, it's really about how the criminal state uses its people within the framework of a savage marketplace in order to get value from them, and that value only comes from their abuse and debasement. This movie is about a hate machine that runs on the blood of people. You're f***ed from birth to death, and even afterward. There's a nihilism here that can be understood as something uniquely Serbian in nature, but also as something universal, something everyone can understand. Let's not kid around here. A lot of people will find this is a tough watch, and rightfully so. Anytime you involve children in stories that employ sexual abuse as a means to make a point, you're playing with fire. And so I would say that viewers who are sensitive to these themes would do well to steer clear of this film, and if you've made it this far into the episode, it's quite clear why that would be the case. No film ever made is meant for everyone, least of all this one. Does this film deserve its title as one of the most disturbing horror movies ever made? I believe there are legit reasons why A Serbian Film is in that conversation for sure. But if I'm being honest with you, and I mean this, my friends, I just watched the documentary Abducted in Plain Sight a few hours after I watched this for this podcast, and that movie, Abducted in Plain Sight, disturbed me profoundly the entire time. I still can't stop thinking about it. It overshadowed A Serbian Film in my mind and helped illustrate for me the fact that at the end of the day, while A Serbian Film's themes are very real, the story is just a work of fiction. And the deal here, folks, is that A Serbian Film doesn't possess any real verisimilitude. It's too well filmed. It's too stylized. It's too over the top. And those things only serve to soften the blow, as it were. I'm not saying that this film won't disturb, but I think a lot of people who refuse to watch it for its content would be pleasantly surprised to find that much of it isn't as bad as you've maybe built it up in your mind to be. That said, as if you didn't realize it by now, this film isn't for the faint of heart. Everyone, I'm giving this a 9 out of 10, and I feel like I've said pretty much everything about it that I wanted to say. I would only add that despite this 9 out of 10, I still don't recommend this film to people for obvious reasons. And that, folks, wraps up our deep dive into A Serbian Film 2010. Well, damn, that's another episode of Horror Corridor in the bag. Episode 19 is done, if you'll allow it. I'd like to take a minute here to plug a couple shows I've done recently. First, my friends, I joined the fine fellas of Kill the Cast on 2 of their recent Horror Coliseum episodes where they pit one movie versus another movie according to a list of categories they devised to see which film will come out on top. We teamed up to pit Friday the 13th The New Blood versus Wes Craven's New Nightmare, both Part 7s from their respective franchises, and I got to join them for Remake versus Remake, Friday the 13th 09 versus Elm Street 2010. I think we do great on those shows, so if you're wondering what I did between this episode and my last one, well, there you go. Please search for Kill the Cast on whichever podcast catching app you got, and look for those 2 recent shows that they did, those Horror Coliseum episodes. Check me out. I'd appreciate that very much. Next, be on the lookout for an appearance I made on the R-rated horror commentary podcast hosted by the wonderful artist Josh James. Dave Z of the Exploding Heads Horror Movie Podcast and I jumped on Josh's show to give you listeners an insane Ghostbusters 1984 commentary. And what's great about shows like that is you get to hear me with absolutely no notes whatsoever, which is something I seldom if ever do. And if I might be so bold, I go a little off the rails on this episode. I keep it classy-ish here on the Horror Corridor, but, well, if not classy, I keep it PG-13 at least. But, I mean, hell, I even pushed it to the limits by giving you that one uncensored F word, my first on the show, by the way. But if I'm a guest, get ready, no censors, no notes, just a ton of insanity. If you want to hear my more crass party side, if you want to hear Watson off the chain, keep your ears peeled for Dave Z and me on the R-rated horror commentary podcast. And hey, speaking of Dave Z, just can't stop podcasting with that guy now, can I? I laid down my 3rd guest spot on the Exploding Heads Horror Movie Podcast. That's the most of any guest who's ever been on their show, by the way, and trust me, I plan to coerce Dave into more appearances in the future. Just you wait, it's gonna happen. But let me ask you this. What's better than Mr. Watson teaming up with Exploding Heads yet again? Oh, I'll tell you. Moods from the 22 Shots of Moods and Horror podcast was the other guest along with me, and he never does guest spots, folks. So that's a special occasion in and of itself. But yeah, we go crazy on The Mist 2007, and that right there is podcasting at its finest. This is a discussion you cannot afford to miss. I don't know exactly when it's going to drop, shortly after this, I imagine, but we break that movie down. We talk lots of shit. I'm uncensored over there as well. It's how we do, and it's amazing. I've already gotten comments from people who watch the live stream on Exploding Heads Patreon. It's top-notch stuff. so check that out. To conclude things here, my friends, we're getting down to the wire here. There aren't very many episodes of Horror Corridor left, and people have been writing to me a lot about this lately. Now, I can promise you that once this show is done, you'll be hearing from me quite a bit. My YouTube project, Understanding the Dark, is fast approaching. I'll absolutely be making a big deal out of stuff when I start that, so you'll never be in the dark about that. And as for podcasting, let's just say I've got an ace up my sleeve as far as that goes. You will not have heard the last of my golden voice on the mic. Trust me, there's a project in the works, a private one at this point, unless you're a future listener, and this is like sort of something like this, like, oh, let's hear that old episode 19 of Horror Corridor, then you'll already know, I guess. But if you're a present listener, get ready for a project that will knock the old socks off your toes. As for Horror Corridor episode 20, Mr. Watson, pardonnez-moi, Monsieur Watson, is gonna get all French on your asses. I don't know which movies yet, alors je regrette, mais the Fab Five? Probably not. I'm wanting to go a little off the beaten path, a little. I mean, you can dine at McDonald's in Paris, but I'm trying to go a little deeper here, like Jacques on le Box. I'm thinking Rubber 2010 maybe, Eyes Without a Face 1960, or en français, Les Yeux Sans Visage. Right? Yeah, sexy. A few others. I'm figuring it out as I go, but rest assured, if you weren't excited about that Horror in the Mountains show that never happened, get ready for this. iTunes if you want, reach out if you want, I don't know. Oh, let me shout out a listener who got a hold of me on Instagram. This gentleman has no other social media, just the gram, and he's super cool and nice. He goes by PP Sweats on the gram, which is funny to me, and this fella's super nice, smart, interesting. I really liked talking with him. I'm not on Instagram much, so I probably have messages I need to check from him. God forbid if I left this gentleman hanging. But I was so happy to see his message, and I just wanted to say, so yeah, PP Sweats, shout out, buddy, love ya. Keep listening to the show. Let's carve out some time to get a real conversation on the gram going. And I just wanted to say howdy doody, because that's the hip way to say what up, to the people who get a hold of me through other ways than the book, the Facebook, that is. And Lil Watt, my son, wanted me to tell you, friends and listeners, that the normal Horror Corridor email has lapsed. So remember, it was masterwatson@horrorcorridor.com. Yeah, the email doesn't exist anymore. So if you've reached out through the email and I didn't answer, I apologize. I noticed a strange cutoff in the amount of emails I was getting months back, and I just figured that after Thanksgiving, people just were done writing into the show. I don't know. I'm hoping that if you're listening now, you're realizing, oh, okay, well then I wrote you, sorry, I guess you didn't get the message. Time to hit him up on Facebook. And I know, Facebook is so passé, right? I mean, shouldn't it be Twitter or Instagram? Well, on my next show, that's how it will be. The secret project, as it were. As for now, hit me up on the Horror Corridor Facebook group page. It's a page you can join, not like. The one you can like isn't me. And good for them for getting a lot of our traffic, right? Good, whatever Horror Corridor like page is, go you. You're probably going to outlast me. Unless it's defunct, which I think it is. Anyways, that's not the one you can like isn't me. Whatever the case, I'd love to hear from you, and that's how we do it. Well, I've enjoyed myself, and I hope you have as well. I'm your host, Mr. Watson, and I thank you very much for venturing with me through door number 19 of the Horror Corridor.